to this episode of Assignment from the BBC World Service. I'm Quentin Somerville, and my producers were Lyndall Markwell, Tanya Doksun and Lubov Sholudko.
That was Assignment from the BBC. I'm Saroja Coelho, and this is CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Well, good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. You're on CBC, live downtown on another warm morning. Warm is an understatement. It's already 22 degrees in Winnipeg this morning. Thanks for joining us. The show's on until 8:37 a.m. And let's say good morning to the team. Brad Lillies is here. Chloe Friesen is here directing the show and covering weather traffic. Sierra Sanders is here as well behind the controls in our control room. Now, if you hear me rushing, that is because we have a very busy news morning. We have had developments overnight. We do have issues with our rail lines. Matt Humphrey is in studio right now with our news headlines to set up what's changed.
Yeah, for the first time in Canadian history, freight traffic has stopped at the same time on our two largest railways. CN Rail and KPKC simultaneously locked out 9,300 employees. It comes after months of labor negotiations came to an impasse before the midnight deadline. Early this morning, roughly $1 billion in goods is hauled along those rail lines each day. And as picket lines go up across the country this morning, we'll hear from the head of the Wheat Growers Association, the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, who farms just west of Winnipeg. You can imagine he's extremely concerned and wants the federal government to step in. And this morning, we're learning more about the horrific triple homicide. Last week in McCreary, experts say intimate partner violence continues to be a serious issue in our province. More news at the bottom of the hour.
All right. Thank you, Matt Humphrey. We're going to build on both those stories. So today on the show, we're going to first of all hear on World Report about the rail line stoppage across the country, the impact. Then we're going to hear from CAP what did they have to say, Keystone Agricultural Producers in advance. What were their greatest concerns? They were with CBC yesterday. Live this morning, we have Barry Prentice, who will join us, who is the Professor of Supply Chain Management at the University of Manitoba. So a lot of analysis on that. To the story out of McCreary, how equipped is our legal system to protect survivors of domestic violence? We're going to have that conversation at 10 to 8 this morning. And then in what is a very busy show this morning, all topics important to you in your life, we have the Premier here. So the Premier is going to join us for our regular monthly interview. He will be here in studio after 8 o'clock. And we will be asking him about a whole bunch of developments in the province, including the two stories that I just mentioned. So stay tuned for all of that. But right now, let's find out what is happening from the national perspective on this story and more. World Report is next.
Today on Q.
I'm Talia Schlanger sitting in for Tom Power. Josh Ramsey is the lead singer of the band Mariana's Trench. He joins me to talk about going big with epic high notes and huge arrangements on the band's new album, plus how depression and addiction have shaped his art.
Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. Canada's biggest railways are shut down in an unprecedented labour dispute. Both CN Rail and CPKC have locked out their workers. Lengthy negotiations failed to come to a settlement by midnight last night. My World Report co-host John Northcott joins me in studio. And John, where do things stand this morning?
Well, Marcia, if you're one of 9,300 engineers, conductors, or other rail workers, chances are you're on a picket line or scheduled to be on one. Talks had been ongoing since last November, but the Teamsters Union and the two companies still far apart on several key issues. The companies say they've proposed serious offers with better pay. The union says their own offers around more rest periods and scheduling have not been seriously considered by either company. Federal officials have supplied mediators, but so far aren't willing to grant the company's request for binding arbitration. And what about back-to-work legislation? At this point, Labour Minister Steve McKinnon says he's not getting into what-ifs.
This is very high stakes for the people involved, but high stakes for the people who aren't represented at this table. So I've reminded these parties that they have this responsibility. I need to be satisfied that they take that responsibility seriously. I've not been satisfied to date with the urgency that they've brought to the task at hand.
High stakes in many ways, with the rate of inflation decreasing and post-pandemic supply chain issues resolving. Many point out the last thing the Canadian economy needs now is a labor disruption of this magnitude.
Yeah, the minister mentioned people not represented at the table. How does this work stoppage affect everyday Canadians?
Marcia, 2/3 of all goods moved within the country itself and over half of all goods exported from this country are carried by rail. Shipments of potash for fertilizer, chlorine to help purify drinking water, steel, cars, trucks, livestock, and grain. Speaking of grain, farmers say it's been a good year in the fields, and all that wheat and canola is supposed to be harvested, loaded, and shipped to market. Steve Crockett is with the Business Council of Alberta.
There is perishable food coming off Canadian farmers' crops today, and tomorrow, and the next day that doesn't have a place to go to get to market. And that's going to decrease the value that farmers can get for their crops.
Eventually, the whole industrial supply chain could be affected, with consumers seeing a shortage of products on store shelves. More immediately, some 30,000 people in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver will have to find another way of making it to work, with commuter trains sidelined because they can't operate on the lines during the labor disruption.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John Northcott with me in studio. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will take center stage today in Chicago. It is the final day of the Democratic National Convention. Harris will make her big address as the presidential nominee, just as her running mate Tim Walz did last night as the party's vice presidential nominee. Following the convention for us in Chicago is the CBC's Ithel Musa. And Ithel, what can we expect to hear from Harris today?
Democrats I've spoken to are concerned about issues like affordability. They want to see women get access to safe and legal abortions. They want policies to address homelessness and protections for members of the LGBTQ plus community. And they want to hear Kamala Harris speak to those issues. Another big one, dividing some progressives, is Israel's war with Hamas. Leaders of the uncommitted national movement held a sit-in outside the Democratic Convention last night after being told they could not speak on the main stage. The group emerged during the presidential primary. Some voters chose the uncommitted option on the Democratic ballot rather than voting for Joe Biden as their presidential nominee in protest. They want the U.S. to stop its military support of Israel.
Tim Walz spoke last night. What can you tell us?
Tim Walz is a man who has what I call real person appeal, and that's something that's really drawn in many Democrats. The former public school teacher spoke last night about his experience as a football coach, his time in the National Guard, and even his family's fertility struggles, all things the Republicans have questioned. Here's more from Walz last night.
When we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love. Freedom to make your own healthcare decisions. And yeah, your kids' freedom to go to school without worrying about being shot dead in the hall.
At one point, Walz told his family he loved them, and the camera panned to his crying 17-year-old son who stood up and yelled, "That's my dad." It was a really emotional and authentic moment last night. To many, Walz represents the Midwest, and that's important because those are the voters Democrats need to secure in the election this fall.
Thank you, Ithel.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Ithel Musa in Chicago. U.S. President Joe Biden says it is time to close the ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas. And he says he called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night to tell him that. Netanyahu is also under pressure from people within his country. Families of hostages want their loved ones back home. Our correspondent Sasha Petrusek has that story.
Under tight security, barely 2 kilometers from the Gaza border, the grief of hostage families. They buried 2 former hostages on the Nir Oz kibbutz, Abraham Munder and his son Ohad, Munder's nephew, Ayal Moore.
We know for sure that there were opportunities to sign a deal and release the hostages. Did not happen, did not occur, and this is very tragic. It does not deserve this kind of end.
Instead, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been stressing a military solution, as he did again at an airbase yesterday, boasting that the Air Force is Israel's iron fist against Hamas. This, as talks aimed at coming up with a ceasefire deal falter in Cairo, despite efforts by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He left the region without the agreement President Joe Biden's been pushing, through a call to Netanyahu. Hamas is insisting that all troops leave Gaza, while Israel wants to continue to control parts of the territory even once fighting stops. For the hostage families, it's not worth the lives of the remaining 100 or so, or those still alive in Gaza. Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, on the Nir Oz kibbutz, Israel.
Divers are still looking for one body off the coast of Sicily. The Italian Coast Guard is ferrying crews to the site of the sunken super yacht. The remains of 5 people have been discovered. Reuters is now reporting the body of British tech magnate Mike Lynch has been brought to shore. There are reports his 18-year-old daughter Hannah is still missing. The yacht went down during a storm early Monday. Investigators are looking into why the vessel sank so quickly. It's been 6 months since Ottawa police violently arrested a young black man. It was a case of mistaken identity. CBC has obtained police reports that tell the story from the side of the officers involved. As Arthur White-Crummey reports, police paint a picture of fear in the confrontation of a man they thought was a dangerous murder suspect.
Constable Martin Corbet says he used reasonable force this February when he punched Kane Nyandagara in the face, hard enough to make his own hand bleed. He says the young black man was resisting arrest, tensing up his body, reaching for his waist. Corbet says he kneed him in the back 2 or 3 times to make him comply. But officers soon learned they had the wrong man when they compared Nyandagara with a photo of the suspect they were really looking for, a man named Bakal. Why did he run, they asked. Nyandagara told them he was scared and wanted to go home. Those details come from police reports released through a Freedom of Information request. They show that patrons and employees at a suburban Ottawa Starbucks called police multiple times to report sightings of a man they thought was Bakal, wanted for a shooting homicide in another neighborhood. Officers who rushed to the scene say they were worried the gun was still outstanding, and when they mistook Nyandagara for Bakal, they say he ignored commands and ran. Police confirmed they pointed firearms at Nyandagara and discharged a taser twice before Corbet tackled him to the ground, just a few blocks from the young man's home. The details in the police reports differ from what Nyandagara told CBC in March on a few key details.
He was pushing me, pushing my head. And
Nyandagara denies he was resisting. He says he dropped his hands in a shrug, as if to ask why police were yelling at him, with guns and tasers drawn as he walked home from a coffee shop. Arthur White-Crummey, CBC News, Ottawa.
That is the latest national and international news from World Report. More on our top story at cbcnews.ca about Canada's 2 major freight railroads coming to a full stop in a labor dispute. On our main page, I'm Marcia Young.
And of course, our show this morning from Manitoba is going to be full of reaction to that labor dispute. Stay tuned. In a moment, we're going to hear from Keystone Agricultural Producers. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is CBC. You're on Information Radio, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube today on another warm day ahead. It's going to be muggy out there. The forecast in a moment, we're already right around 22 degrees. So in addition to analysis of the labor dispute and local reaction, also this hour on the program, we're going to be talking about some politics. As you might know, on September 16th, there's a by-election in Elmwood, Transcona. But right now, the federal Liberal cabinet is going to be gathering in Halifax for their extended retreat. What's on the agenda there, we will find out. And then coming up at 10 to 8 this morning, or 10 to 7 rather this morning, should Manitoba raise a new flag? A recent poll says Manitobans are split on whether or not that should be the case. So stay tuned. This is out of information that was a recent survey. And you might recall that earlier this year, there were a number of different polls and surveys looking at this. So we'll hear more about that discussion just before 7. Right now, 6:11. Back to the top news. Matt Humphrey is in.
Yes, this unprecedented rail stoppage, which began this morning, began right in the middle of harvest season. The head of the Wheat Growers Association, the Western Canadian Association, says it's an extremely stressful situation as most grain moves by train. Again, in a first for Canada, CN Rail and KPKC simultaneously locked out 9,300 employees, stopping the shipping of nearly $1 billion a day in goods. We're only 3 days into the harvest, and there are calls for the federal government to intervene before the situation worsens. We'll hear more on that at the bottom of the hour. And the leadership at a Jewish congregation in Winnipeg says yesterday's bomb threat is frightening but not unexpected. Yesterday morning, a mass bomb threat was sent to institutions across Canada, including here in Winnipeg. More details at 6:30.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
It is now 6:12, and Chloe Friesen, as promised, is in this morning again. Hi there.
Hello, good morning.
So the forecast, pretty warm out there, hey?
It's warm, but there's also some rain and some cloud kind of across the province here. We are looking at light rain in Dauphin and Brandon at the airport, as well Portage la Prairie. You are seeing some rain right now at 19 degrees. Today in Winnipeg, we are looking at mainly cloudy skies. We could see some showers or thunderstorms this morning as well. 30% chance of showers late this afternoon with the risk of thunderstorms. Wind south 20, high of 25, but as with that humidex 33 degrees, it's already about 21 degrees at the Forks. So we're starting out a little warm today. I will have a more in-depth look at the forecast coming up later in the show. And if anything is getting in your way on your commute this morning, I would love to hear from you. 204-788-3093.
So we will be asking the Premier of Manitoba when he's in studio live in the next hour his thoughts on this rail disruption, and also whether or not he thinks the federal government, should this, continue for some length of time, should use back-to-work legislation for the workers. So we'll have those questions with Wab Kinew. But let's build on what's happened overnight, because as Matt was mentioning, this is a first for freight traffic on our two largest railways to simultaneously ground to a halt in this country. So after bitter negotiations, CN Rail and CPKC locked out, as Matt said, 9,300 engineers, conductors, also yard workers. The parties failing to agree on a new contract. The deadline, of course, was midnight last night. Or I guess I should say midnight early this morning. So what does this mean for Manitoba, where our agriculture sector relies heavily on rail for shipping its products? Harvest is well underway. Farmers have been watching all of this very closely. And Jill Verway is president of Keystone Agricultural Producers. In advance of the overnight development, she spoke with guest host on Radio Noon yesterday, Laurie Hoogstraten.
The only or the major source of transportation of our goods and supplies being the rail. This strike will have a large impact on the industry.
Can you be specific about exactly what gets hauled? Is it strictly grain? Is it also the meat industry? What are the mechanics of it?
Well, we've got both, and the entire industry, grain specifically, close to home, but also on the livestock sector side. Rail is the primary source of transportation that's used to get our product to port, as well as being the primary supplier of our supplies, input supplies that we use here on the farm. So it's hitting on both sides. And currently, the major impact being producers are in the field taking this year's crop off and have contracts that are in place for delivery. We're already seeing the impact at elevators where we're being, cautioned that they don't have the capacity to hold grain or take delivery of contracts in some cases when this rail strike would mean ending their ability to send grain to export.
Have you noticed prices dropping in terms of contracts?
Prices traditionally, and we have seen them soften here in the fall. We are seeing that pressure on a day-to-day basis, and it'll have a larger impact, to cushion the blow of additional costs that grain companies are going to have to incur if they have to look at other alternative methods of transporting grain. There just simply isn't enough trucking capacity in our country to accommodate this. The rail is the most efficient, the most safe way to transport our goods effectively and at the most cost effective way. And to have this impact right now in the fall could mean a lot of dollars lost, as well as, at the end of the day, the reputation of Canada as a reliable source of grain internationally. That is going to hurt our country dramatically if this continues.
So the threat of a major labor disruption has been on farmers and producers' radar for a while. Has there been any action that they've been able to take ahead of this, or is it just keeping their fingers crossed?
Well, unfortunately, it's a wait and see. We have taken some action as far as being able to let our voice be heard federally down east. It's important. It's an imperative that our federal counterparts know the urgency that this is going to have a very negative effect internationally as Canada being a reliable source of grain and food, and ultimately, it's in their hands to continue to be there to I guess put pressure on the individuals to both parties to continue. We do have a few hours here, but ultimately, if there isn't any resolution, then we're depending on the federal government to step in and to lend assistance to ensure that there is arbitration through Section 107 and to enforce that they're put back to work. But we're at a wait and see right now. But it is devastating for our country to again look at something that is going to hurt our reputation internationally, as well as hurt the pocketbooks of producers and ultimately the pocketbooks of every Canadian with further disruptions like this.
Well, and we've been talking about what the producers are shipping out, but what about things that they might be expecting to come in by rail? What might those be?
Well, the first thing would be fertilizer for the upcoming season. We also look at fuel and particularly down east, propane for heating of their barns for livestock operations. So rail is the only safe and affordable way to transport goods. If you look at the other infrastructures that we have in Canada, the availability of trucks and labor to transport goods with trucks or something other than rail is simply additional cost, and we just don't. The resources aren't there to accommodate for that.
So, how optimistic are you that a settlement will be reached in these final hours?
Well, I think we're just waiting at this time, but I think the pressure is being put on by all of our provincial resource associations as well as our national ag associations, combined with businesses across Canada to put the pressure on our members of Parliament in the East to ensure that they know the urgency of having a resolution here, and if that at the end of the day means that we're forcing back to work regulations and forcing arbitration or having the partners at the table, I think that's the last thing that we want to see. We want to see the parties involved come to a resolution here before a strike occurs.
Now, of course, CAP is leading the way in advocacy and so on for the producers and raising the profile of what problems this is causing. But in the event of a strike or lockout, is there another role that CAP will play as well?
I think from an information standpoint, providing our members with what's happening on the ground, providing assistance to producers in that avenue. And then, of course, continuing to have that collaboration with other associations, as well as our sister organization being the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, who is located in Ottawa, to provide us ongoing information on what's happening.
So you can tell by her talking about the fact that should this happen in that conversation, the tense she was using, that conversation was from yesterday. We wanted to revisit it to set up some of the stakes. Now that, for the first time in Canada, freight traffic on the two largest railways has simultaneously ground to a halt. So the deadline was midnight, but that was Jill Verwey, president of Keystone Agricultural Producers, or CAP, in conversation with Laurie Hoogstraten yesterday on Radio Noon, outlining, as I mentioned, what's at stake in Manitoba. So their conversation was, should this happen this morning? It has happened. Now, you can go to our website for the updates that have developed since midnight when workers were locked out, and that is cbc.ca/Manitoba, or on our national site. And I should mention we have a live interview this morning in the next hour with Barry Prentice. He is, of course, professor of supply chain management at the Asper School of Business at the University of Manitoba. So ongoing coverage continues this morning. It is right now 6:22 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. And next on the show, we've been talking a lot about the politics south of the border. But in just over 3 weeks, there is a by-election here that will be watched closely. On September 16th, voters in Elmwood, Transcona will choose who will fill Daniel Blakey's seat there after he left to work with the province. And that riding, it was long held by the NDP. However, it was conservative from 2011 to 2015. Meantime, at the federal level, the Liberal cabinet's going to gather in Halifax for their extended retreat this weekend. Prime Minister Trudeau and other cabinet ministers get there Sunday. It all wraps up Tuesday. And for some insight on this, Ryan Tumulty is here, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Hi, Ryan.
Hi there.
So the last time the Liberal cabinet had an extended retreat was, you have to go back to January in Montreal. What do you think the focus is going to be?
I think it's the same focus as they had start of the year in Montreal, because it's still the same issue that's troubling Canadians, right? It's still this economic, cost of living, housing issues, the interest rates, these sorts of concerns. That's what's got people most worried, and that is really what's driving the Liberals down the polls and the Conservatives up. So I think, linking those two things for the Liberals, trying to figure out a way to keep the economy improving. We have seen some good numbers recently, to keep that momentum going, and then to sort of spin that into better numbers for themselves is, I think, what the Liberals are going to be focusing on.
Are they going to focus at all, do you think, on Justin Trudeau's leadership?
I think Cabinet is a pretty loyal bunch. I think the people around that particular table don't really have a lot of questions about his leadership. I think they support the Prime Minister. That is partially why they are in the job, of course. I think for them, also to suddenly suggest that, the Prime Minister is the only problem here. These Cabinet ministers have been around the table making decisions with him throughout this whole process. So, it would be difficult for them to walk away from him now.
Fair enough.
Where he will face those kinds of questions, though, is next month in Nanaimo, where the caucus is gathering.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned already that we've all been watching what's happening down south. Of course, the Democratic convention this week, previously the Republican convention. The American election now just 2.5 months away. What issues will this prompt around the cabinet table, do you think, here?
Yeah, they have to pay attention to it. It's the same for any Canadian government, really, going back, decades. You have to be worried about what the U.S. administration is going to do on defense, on security issues, and probably most importantly, trade. There are a lot of big trade files that are going to be concerns under either administration, frankly. Obviously, Donald Trump, everyone remembers, renegotiated NAFTA. He put tariffs on Canadian steel at one point. He was a sort of unpredictable trading partner on a lot of fronts, and he's promised to do much of the same if reelected. But the Biden administration has had protectionist moments as well. Lots of Buy America provisions in their legislation. The Inflation Reduction Act that the Biden administration passed, that drove a lot of investments in EV vehicles to the U.S., and you saw the federal government having to step up and match, as they did in Windsor and London and a couple of other places. So, I think the government has to pay attention to this. Any Canadian government has to pay attention to what's going on in this election.
I mentioned the by-election coming up here in Manitoba, but the significance of holding this retreat in Halifax for the Liberals could be related to another by-election, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Winnipeg by-election, this is not a fight that the Liberals are really in. I think they're going to be a distant third. That's where they have, finished in Elmwood for, 20 years at least. So that's not really going to be a big fight for them. But Halifax, there is a by-election that is likely to happen there. The MP hasn't formally sat down, but Andy Fillmore, he is currently running to be mayor of Halifax. He's made it clear he is resigning from Parliament. So there will be a by-election there. And then Atlantic Canada has actually been really friendly to the Liberals since 2015, but that seems to be wearing off. And so I think that might have played part of the role in picking that. I don't think the PMO expects that just showing up for a cabinet retreat will change their fortunes, but the cabinet retreat has to be somewhere, and so I think they figure it can't hurt to try it in Halifax.
I was going to ask you what the biggest challenge the Liberals are going to face, whether or not that'll be discussed at this retreat, but I can't imagine that the work stoppage at the rail lines isn't going to take over a lot of that, the urgency here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, whatever was on the agenda just got scrubbed for this rail stoppage because it's just such an enormous impact. I'm sure you've talked about this already, but, we're talking about $1 billion in trade every day. For grain farmers, it's apparently about $50 million a day in losses. The Liberals will have to pay attention to this. If they don't resolve this by the time this retreat gets underway, I think, that is a real pressure point for them.
Thank you for this, Ryan. As always, appreciate your time.
All right.
That's Ryan Tumulty, parliamentary reporter with the National Post.
The CBC News app delivers the answers you want to know and need to know.
What an extraordinary scene.
The breaking stories that shape your world. Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We're just approaching Gaza.
Your source for mobile news. Delivered when you want, where you want.
This situation has changed very quickly.
The CBC News app. Download for free.
Time right now is 6:28 a.m. You're on CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Thanks for joining us this morning. It is hot again, 21 and cloudy, a high today of 25 with humidex 33. Showers or thunderstorms are expected this morning. Brad had a nice shot of the sky there. Can we see that again, Brad, on YouTube? Look at that. It's one of these strange things. Chloe mentioned this the other day on the air when she was doing the weather. We don't want to talk about it being unusual or beautiful in a strange way because it's haze and it's smoke in a lot of reasons. That's why the sky is this color. But it really is an unusual, beautiful thing to see, when you understand the context and just look at it, though, for what it is. On YouTube this morning, you'll see this shot, but it's almost taken on a grayish purple hue today in the city of Winnipeg. As mentioned, we are expecting those showers on the way. In other parts of the province right now, we do, in fact, have active weather. So Brandon with light rain right now, as well as Dauphin. And we've got mist around Lynn Lake, light rain in Portage, and fog patches are affecting the Thompson area this morning. As mentioned, though, in Winnipeg, it's 21. If you need to update us on the morning commute, you can always give us a call at 788-3093 if you have any problems. Well, I'm betting you can guess what's leading business news after our local cast at 6:30. It is, of course, the lockout from the railways, and we'll hear more about that from Matt in a moment as well. Phil DeMont, though, also on business news this morning, is going to be talking about how there's more bad news over at TD Bank as they are setting aside more than $2.5 billion to cover some of those expected U.S. fines that are surrounding a recent issue that they had with the bank's lax anti-money laundering practices. So those stories are coming up with Phil DeMont in business news. But first, as mentioned, your CBC Winnipeg news.
This is CBC News. At 6:30, it's cloudy and 17 degrees in the Paw, 21 degrees and cloudy over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning, I'm Matt Humphrey. At the top of the news, for the first time in Canada, freight traffic on our two largest railways has simultaneously ground to a halt. It's a new threat to our supply chain as we try to move forward from pandemic-related disruptions. And it means added stress for farmers. That's the sound of Gunter Joham taking off his crop at his farm just west of Winnipeg. He is the president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association. Joham says the strike by CN Rail and KPKC is very concerning. After bitter negotiations, the companies locked out 9,300 engineers, conductors, and yard workers after the parties failed to agree on a new contract. Joham says most farmers don't have room to store what they harvest. The elevators will soon be full. Farmers won't get paid, and it's a catastrophe to have both railways shut down.
Not a good move at all, because with one railway, then we could limp along, but this will shut down not just agriculture, but the whole economy. Everybody will feel it.
Joham wants the federal government to step in now and remedy the situation. Combined, the rail companies haul about $1 billion in goods each day. And it affects commuter traffic in some cities as well. A leader with the Winnipeg synagogue says her resolve hasn't been shaken by a bomb threat yesterday. Dozens of Jewish synagogues and institutions across Canada received a threatening email warning of explosives. Yesterday morning in Winnipeg, Sherry Zedek Synagogue received the threat. Executive Director Rena Sector-El-Bays believes the people behind the email were trying to scare them, but she doesn't want them to win.
I want our congregation to know that we're looking after them and that we're taking all the necessary measures. We don't want to stop doing what we do. The purpose of this whole thing was a campaign to create fear and disruption, so we're not going to give in to it.
After learning of the threat, the congregation quickly evacuated the Temple Shalom building they're temporarily using. They returned yesterday afternoon after getting the all clear. Last week's triple homicide in McCreary is renewing calls for action around intimate partner violence. RCMP say the victims were the parents and brother of the suspect's former common-law partner. Court documents show the 37-year-old woman who managed to escape was granted a protection order last year, but the suspect, 41-year-old Marlon Glover, breached the conditions of that order numerous times. Statistics Canada says our province, Manitoba, has the second highest rate of intimate partner violence among provinces. Carrie Prodzik with the Parkland Crisis Center in Dauphin says a coordinated response is needed.
We need to take action. We need to do more advocacy. We need to have more resources in areas, especially in rural communities where resources are very limited for people to access.
Prodzik says what happened in McCreary shows intimate partner violence is more prevalent than people may think. And finally, some Winnipeg cyclists want the province to change traffic laws to allow them to slow roll through stop signs. It's called the Idaho Stop, named after the U.S. state that implemented it as law more than 40 years ago. The law in Idaho lets cyclists slow down when approaching an intersection, but they can proceed without stopping if the coast is clear. Hillary Rosentreter says the laws requiring cyclists to come to a full stop actually put them in danger.
The problem with this safety measure not being legal is that you're essentially criminalizing safety. The main reason why cyclists implement and use the Idaho Stop is to keep themselves safe, to clear the intersection, to avoid potential interactions with cars as much as possible.
A rally to support changing the law is planned for 5 p.m. today at the corner of Westminster Avenue and Walnut Street. And that is your CBC News from Winnipeg. For news anytime, you can head to our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba, or you can use the CBC News app.
All right, thanks a lot, Matt.
Back soon.
Matt Humphrey in our news department this morning. Now, on that story about the Idaho Stop, I want to mention that after 7 o'clock, we have a guest who's a recognized cycling expert in Supreme Courts of British Columbia and Alberta. His name is Chuck Glover, and he actually says he's in favor of cyclists using the Idaho Stop, but he has concerns if it were to become law. So we're going to dig into that and also try to understand where he's coming from, as he has a lot of experience around this. So stay tuned for that. that after 7. Right now, let's get into the morning commute here in the weather details in our regional forecast from CBC. Here's Chloe Friesen again.
Good morning. Brandon, at the airport right now, folks, you're looking at a light rain shower. It's 19 degrees. Today, you're looking at those thunderstorms ending this morning, then clearing skies. Wind becoming west 20 early this afternoon. A high of 25 with the humidex feeling like 30 degrees for folks in Brandon. In Dauphin, you're also looking at light rain right now, 17 degrees. Those showers should end this morning, then a mix of sun and cloud. Wind becoming west 30 early in the afternoon, a high of 25 with the humidex feeling like 31. For folks in Thompson at the moment, fog patches, 13 degrees, our low spot in the province. Cloudy skies, rain beginning early this afternoon. Risk of a thunderstorm as well. Could amount to 20 millimeters of precipitation there. Wind becoming north 20 late this afternoon, a high of 22 with the humidex feeling like 27. It's already 21 degrees here in Winnipeg at the Forks. We're starting warm. We're looking at mainly cloudy skies, showers or thunderstorms this morning with a 30% chance of showers later this afternoon. Also looking at the risk of thunderstorms late this afternoon. Wind south 20. We're looking at a high of 25, so already only 4 degrees away with the humidex feeling like 33 degrees. The commute has been very quiet, which makes sense for this time of day. But if you do come across something that is slowing you down or just you think your fellow commuter should know about it, I would love to hear from you. You can call our commuter line at 204-788-3093.
People should enjoy it now, though, Chloe, because when school starts, that's only in 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks now. Winnipeg goes back. Winnipeg
goodness.
1 division. Yeah, I know. Red River's next Monday.
I wish you all the best. And they get to go back to school shopping, Marcy. That's the best part to me.
Oh, that is the best part
of back
actually.
to school.
I know.
I love a fresh pen.
Who's not into the smell of fresh loose leaf, right?
Crayons.
I still sometimes smell our scripts. Is that weird? Maybe
No,
that's
when
weird.
they come out of the printer, I'm with you. I'm with you.
All right, let's get to more serious matters here. 23 minutes to 7 o'clock, and it's time for business news. Phil DeMont is in this morning with the report, filling in for Crystal Lee Ramlakan. Good morning, Phil.
You guys are strange. Smelling printer?
I know.
I know.
That's kind
of odd. I never got that smell.
It doesn't hurt anyone. Try it. Let's talk about this unprecedented labor dispute and the lockout. So CN and CP, we've been hearing it all morning. It happened midnight last night. Workers locked out. So obviously it means the economy is going to take a hit. But where and what are the estimates for the economic loss?
Yeah, right now the best I got is 2 weeks. If the lockout lasted 2 weeks, it would cost Canada $3 billion in terms of lost GDP. That's according to the Conference Board of Canada, a pretty august crowd. But that's if the lockout of 9,300 workers at CN and CPKC goes longer than any rail stoppage in at least the past 12 years. So this would be 2 weeks would be longer than anyone I could see since 2012. So starting at midnight, the two railways shut down operations. They say to give companies that ship and receive products certainty around a labor stoppage. There was concerns about, is it going to happen? Not. So they basically said, oh, no, we're going to shut her down. Been talking to the unions for the past 9 months, but apparently still too far away from a realistic settlement. So CN and CP said they're offering increased wages, better scheduling. The union representing engineers and conductors said the company wants to send workers across the country for months at a time to fill job gaps in their operations. Regardless, though, it's a problem for everyone from farmers to resource companies to automakers who rely on trains to get their products to market. And a lot of these you can't ship another way. You can't put rocks on a truck, more or less. Agriculture sector estimates it would cost them $50 million lost sales in a day. Now, so you compare this to the 8-day strike back in 2019, TD estimated that cost Canada $1.5 billion. So you're going, well, that's twice as much. But that stoppage was only at CN, and CP's takeover of Kansas City Southern Railway in 2021 means rail stoppage in Canada would affect traffic in the U.S. much more than in the past. Common wisdom is the government can't let this rail strike go on very long, but past 5 stoppages in the sector, 2 have lasted longer than a week. The trick here, first time both major railways have stopped operating at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Unprecedented, as we've been saying. So we'll have more analysis, including a supply chain management expert from here in Manitoba. That's live in the next hour. Let's go to another story this morning, Phil. More bad news at TD Bank, right?
Yeah, setting aside more than $2.5 billion to cover expected U.S. fines surrounding its lax anti-money laundering practices. Made the admission earlier this week, because its earnings come out. staring at fines of more than $3 billion. That's the largest ever levied by U.S. regulators on a Canadian bank. Under fire for more than a year because of its inability to track cash, getting illegally pushed through its branches south of the border. This popped up last year. They were set to take over a bank, regional bank in the mid-U.S. Got stopped by Washington. The reasons at the time were unclear, but it came to light that TD was front and center of an investigation into a drug ring that laundered more than $650 million through financial institutions at 3 U.S. states. TD was one of the institutions. Experts say the bank can pay the fines without serious financial consequences, but probably will have to sell some shares in its holdings, especially in Charles Schwab, because Canadian regulators will want them to make up that cash to make sure there's enough on hand to do the usual regulatory issues. But overall, TD, it's a bit of a mess right there, down there, and especially in terms of its anti-money laundering kind of practices.
And finally, here's my best cackle. Does that sound like... Okay, that was really, was it the control room's cheering, but I think that was pretty lame. I'm trying to set up the fact that you have a Halloween business story. Starbucks starting early.
Yep, selling pumpkin lattes 2 days earlier than last year, but it's important for Starbucks, part of a trend where retailers are coming out with these special days earlier and earlier. So for Starbucks, they started flogging the pumpkin spice beauties on Thursday. Last year was the 24th, so that's the 2 days. But it's important because the chain gets more than 10% of its sales from seasonal items, stuff that you can only get in a certain time of year. Starbucks has seen its sales and foot traffic drop in recent quarters, so looks like the early start to the latte season is an effort to energize its revenues. But we've seen this among retailers in different holidays or different days. Last year, the Dollar Tree, for example, in the U.S., had its Halloween merchandise out on shelves by August. After the pandemic, shoppers began hearing Christmas music in some stores in September. And in past years, Walmart began offering end-of-year sales in October, which I think by definition is not the end of the year. Couple of reasons. After the pandemic, some companies, retailers had trouble getting products. So rather than have shelves being empty, they just trotted out Christmas stuff, whatever they had on hand. But more recently, earlier seasonal items gets people more interested in buying in off-peak times, say like the summer, where they might not be buying as much. Well, all of a sudden, hey, I can get my Halloween stuff now, and maybe I'll get it in October. That kind of idea. But regardless, I think if Starbucks is any indication, we'll be hearing jingle bells in July.
Stop. All right, markets, what do we know?
Right now, they're up. Germany, France, UK up marginally. Good day in Asia. Hong Kong was up 1.5%. The Nikkei in Japan was up 0.75%. Oil up 11 cents, $72.04 a barrel. And the Canadian dollar, it's down up slightly, 73.65 cents U.S.
All right, Phil, thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
That is Phil Demont with our business news. Well, good morning, everyone. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on 89.3 FM, 990 AM, or on the app this morning, this is CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and thanks for being with us. We've got some mixed conditions out there in Winnipeg. It is not raining right now. We may see thunderstorms or showers this morning. It's cloudy, 21. In Brandon, though, there is light rain right now falling, and it is 19 degrees. We've got some music next from a local artist, Cree singer-songwriter Fontaine, and from their debut EP called Yarrow Lover. This tune's called Homemaker.
Never wanted to be a homemaker. Always wanted to live in the city, with the coffee shops and little bars, and the sirens and the busy cars. That's all I thought I'd need. I never was somebody's girl, so forgive me if I'm a little scared to give this thing a whirl. But honey, you know that you're making it easy. Still I'm confused. I've lost myself. Something new. yourself in the mirror. And there's nothing you could do for me that would make this any clearer. No. Still I'm confused. I've lost myself.
Homemaker by Fontaine. Local music for you this morning out of Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and this is Information Radio. You're on CBC. As we've been mentioning, 21 degrees in Winnipeg. Well, today's top story across the country is a first in Canada. Freight traffic on our two largest railways has simultaneously ground to a halt. How are you affected by that here in Manitoba? What are your concerns this morning? 788-3205. We'll take calls. We'll get them on the air. 788-3205. Of course, we're also appealing to those early morning producers out there who might be up and getting the crop off and have very deep concerns about how that grain, if it's grain, is going to potentially move across the country or not, I should be saying. So call us 788-3205. You can also write to us on my Facebook page, which is Marcy Marcusa. I'll post something there momentarily, and that acts as a show page during the show. We already do have one comment, and this came in from a producer who wrote to us, "It seems wrong to me that one group of people have the power to shut down a lot of businesses across the country. Unions have their place, but there needs to be a balance. I'm not fully aware of what they're asking for, but they can hold a lot of people hostage. It's a lot of power, and hopefully this gets resolved quickly." End quote. So that coming in from a farmer out of southern Manitoba today. You can also write to us, by the way, if you prefer, by emailing radio893@cbc.ca. Well, next on the show this morning, should Manitoba get a new flag? At the start of the month, Probe Research asked this. According to their findings, Manitobans can't seem to see eye to eye on the answer. So approximately 49% of respondents answered that question, saying they would like the flag to be replaced, but then 51% said they like it how it is. The current design features Manitoba's coat of arms on the old red ensign, which was similar to Canada's flag until the maple leaf was adopted in the 1960s. David Kendall is a member of Manitoba's Vexillological Association. I knew I'd have to say that twice. He says it is time for Manitoba to start flying a new flag, and he spoke to the CBC's Emily Brass about it.
So what was your reaction when you saw the results of the survey?
Well, I'd say the results pretty much mesh with what I've been seeing of people. I've heard people that think, yes, we should change it, and people that think, no, we shouldn't. And I mean, change is always something that's controversial. People want to speak out whether they're in favor or against change, and that's pretty much what I see. Is there's no real big consensus one way or another on the issue from what I've seen.
Wow. So you, though, you're pretty clear that you think the flag needs a redesign. Why do you feel that way?
Yes, as somebody who's liked flags for a while, there's just several things about the flag that isn't really a good flag design. Like, it doesn't really say Manitoba. I mean, you've got the Union Jack in a whole quarter of the flag, which is the most visible part of it, which is more suited for a place well, England, they have the Union Jack there, not us. Of course, it's not really distinguishable from a flag like Ontario's, which also happens to be our neighbor, so they would get confused quite easily. And aside from the bison on it, there's no real Manitoba symbols on there. So it's not really saying Manitoba as much as it can. You take one look at it, and Manitoba isn't the first thing that you think of.
What does it say to you then when you look at it?
Well, when I look at it, it seems more born out of the time that it came out. As you mentioned in your intro, it was created in a time when we were replacing the old red ensign, which looked a lot like Manitoba's flag, if you're unaware of that, with the Canadian flag. And people in Manitoba were saying, oh, we don't like the new Canadian flag. We want to keep it somehow. So the Manitoba government made this flag official. But now, of course, even Manitobans are very proud of the Canadian flag, which kind of shows that we kind of chose poorly on that.
Well, and yeah, so just looking at the other side for a minute, why might someone argue for the flag to stay the same?
Well, I guess it's because, we've had this flag for a while. It says Manitoba to people because it's always said Manitoba. And there's always, of course, the cost associated with it. Anything that the government does associated with cost, if we do change it, of course, people would have to buy new flags. I'm looking out a window right now. There's a Manitoba flag flying, so they would have to buy a new flag as well as every other place that flies the Manitoba flag. So there is costs involved with it. There's always people not wanting to spend as much money on it. So that's some of the arguments that I've heard for keeping it the same.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I was in Ontario earlier this summer and I was like, wait a second, that flag looks just like the Manitoba flag.
I've noticed that too. I'm thinking, why are they flying the Manitoba flag in Canoa? Oh, wait, that's not the Manitoba flag. That's the Ontario flag.
Very little difference. I mean, what's some of the history behind that? Do you know why they look so similar and why we ended up with this design?
Well, it's again based on like when Canada was formed, we were more British in design, so all the provinces at one time had a flag that looked like ours, either a red ensign or a blue ensign with a coat of arms on it. And we didn't really think much about it because we thought of ourselves more as subjects of the British Empire at the time. So we were quite happy flying a flag that had that allegiance. And over time, the provinces changed it to something that more reflects them. And Manitoba and Ontario wanted to stay because, again, the changing of the national flag to the Maple Leaf wanted to say, well, we still like the old flag, and we're the ones who haven't changed.
Wow. Because I'm sure for many people, you look at that Union Jack and it's even got the English flag, on the top of the crest. They probably look at that and say, wow, that's really giving me a message of our colonial past.
Yeah, I think nowadays they more put it as a tie to links to a monarchy. King Charles is still our head of state, so they kind of word it in that way in modern times now, I guess.
Okay. So how common is it for a province or a country to change its flag?
Well, it's becoming more common nowadays. Even like 15, 20, 25 years ago, you didn't see it that much, but you might have heard in the news there's Utah changed its flag a couple of years ago. Minnesota just changed theirs this year. Of course, our neighbor to the south in Minnesota. And people are more wanting to say, hey, we want a flag that really says what our values are, what our sense of identity is, rather than just a flag that is indistinguishable from others, especially in the terms of U.S. state flags. And now there's states like Massachusetts, I think, and Maine are looking to change theirs. And countries often change theirs when they have a a change of national character as well. Like there was the example of Libya used to have an all-green flag under Gaddafi because he was touting his green plan, and then when Gaddafi got rid of, they had a new start to the country and changing all their symbols to be something like the new Libya. So,
Wow. So, David, before you go, I mean, just tell us what you think it should look like.
Well, one thing that I think that they do got right on the flag is something I mentioned before. Really, the only Manitoban part of it is the bison. We do definitely connect with the bison here. That's a provincial symbol. You go into the legislature, you see those two big bisons. They're on our road signs. The U of M football team, of course, is the bison. So that definitely should be on there. I know a lot of people are saying that we should have something to express the Indigenous heritage, Métis heritage. Of course, we're the home of the Métis homeland. Excuse me, Métis homeland. So there should be some sort of recognition of those who came before us on the flag, and something more multicultural, which is what Manitoba is, more than the primarily British settlement that we were back in 1870 when our province was founded.
Okay. Well, maybe they'll consult you when it's time to redesign it, if that ever happens. Thanks so much for joining us, David.
No problem. Thank you very much.
In conversation with CBC's Emily Brass about the flag in Manitoba and whether it's time to redesign it. That was David Kendall, who's a member of the Manitoba's Vexillological Association. It is 3 minutes now to 7 o'clock, and Matt Humphreys in with other headlines.
Good morning. A group of Winnipeg cyclists say current laws around stop signs put them at risk. They're holding a rally tonight, calling on the provincial government to allow cyclists to treat stop signs as yield signs, meaning you would only need to make a complete stop when there's oncoming traffic. If there's no oncoming traffic, you would have to slow down, but you don't need to stop completely. We'll hear more about that after World Report and lots more about the vexillological. I'm not even going to try.
We're practicing. Vexillological.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to pretend I said it correctly every time, but I did screw it up once too.
Sound great.
It's a mouthful. Matt
Excellent.
Humphrey, thank you. Weather-wise, cloudy 21 right now, and today we do have a chance of showers in our forecast. So a 30% chance of late afternoon showers or thunderstorms this morning, and then, late morning, and then also returning through the day later again. So kind of off and on. We have a high of 25 with Humidex 33. If you need us on the morning commute, you want to pass something along, please use the commuter line 788-3093. So far, so good. So early on the bike walker roll. So we'll keep an eye on things out there. In Winnipeg, we have a lot of news developing, and in the next hour of the show, we're going to dig into some of it. A lot of people across the whole province, in fact, are reacting to what has been happening and asking this question: does our legal system do enough to protect victims of intimate partner violence? Reacting to what's happened in McCreary, I should have said there. RCMP say the recent triple homicide in McCreary was a horrific act of intimate partner violence. We're going to have a conversation about how things might be strengthened in this province to better protect people. Of course, we have that other story that happened in Carman earlier this year. In addition, in the next hour of the show, so Matt was just talking about the Idaho stop. How does it actually work? And will it work here? Is one of the specific questions when you look at our actual traffic patterns and management. We're going to have that discussion with someone who knows and has studied this, so stay tuned after 7 for that interview. And then, yes, to the top story, those labour talks have collapsed. Canada's 2 major freight railroads have come to a full stop. Barry Prentice, Professor of Supply Chain Management at the U of M, is coming up on the show to talk about implications this morning, so stay tuned for that. And I do believe, looking through the blind, we've just started to rain now. It's wet in downtown Winnipeg. World Report, next.
Rochaquelo. I'm the host of the new live call-in show, Just Asking. I take your questions about what's in the news or your finances, health, even your relationships, and then throw them to an expert. Just Asking. Let's figure it out together.
Just Asking with Saroja Coelho. Live Saturday afternoon at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific, and on CBC Listen.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. Canada's biggest railways are shut down. CN Rail, CPKC, and the Teamsters have failed to reach an agreement. And each day the workers are locked out could cost the Canadian economy tens of millions of dollars. It will affect commuters in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. It will affect farmers trying to get their crops to market. And it could leave valuable cargo piling up at ports. For more, let's go to Janice McGregor in our Parliamentary Bureau. And Janice, all the parties have issued lengthy statements about why talks broke down. What did they say?
Marcia, talks haven't broken off. Federal mediators still on the job trying to sort this out. CN, for example, says it made a final attempt to avoid this last evening in Montreal. It actually released some average salary figures for the public to consider. It said the deal it put on the table would have improved wages even more, offered predictable schedules, lined up with the new rules the federal government put in place for mandatory rest periods. But it said the union did not respond. It accused the Teamsters of not showing any urgency or desire to reach a deal. From its bargaining table in Calgary, CPKC said it too presented an enhanced final offer last night. It said its wage increases exceeded inflation and what it's asking for doesn't compromise safety. And yet it too doesn't feel a negotiated outcome is within reach because the Teamsters, in its view, are making unrealistic demands. The union statement blamed the railways for this work stoppage, saying none of their offers were seriously considered by either company at either table. Teamsters President Paul Bouchard said the railways have shown themselves willing to compromise rail safety and tear families apart to earn an extra buck.
The railways have been asking for binding arbitration as far back as June. The federal minister has been reluctant to agree to that, but now we have this work stoppage. What is the government going to do?
The railways want this settled now, ahead of the peak shipping period in the fall for things like grain. But Parliament isn't set to return for another month or so, making it not impossible to pass back-to-work legislation, but certainly harder. Labour Minister Steve McKinnon yesterday didn't tip his hand about what might be coming next.
I'm not going to get into what ifs. The parties have to understand that Canadians are counting on them. It is their duty to get a deal.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland was using words like sabotage and self-harm yesterday to describe what a rail stoppage does to Canada's economy. We'll see how patient this government can afford to be.
Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Janice McGregor reporting from Ottawa.
Let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America.
Oprah Winfrey helping the Democratic Party keep up its momentum. This is the final day of the convention in Chicago. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will address the crowd later today. But last night, her running mate, Tim Walz, accepted the party's vice presidential nomination. The CBC's Richard Madden has more from Chicago.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz played up his Midwestern roots with an energetic, folksy acceptance speech as his party's vice presidential nominee.
It's the honor of my life.
Up until 2 weeks ago, Walz was relatively unknown in national politics until vaulting to the spotlight as Kamala Harris's running mate. So he introduced himself to American voters by telling his life story as a military veteran, former teacher, and football coach, casting himself in the dual role as defender of freedoms and an attack dog against Republicans.
While other states were banning books from their schools, we were banishing hunger from ours. We also protected reproductive freedom.
Party strategists hope Walz will help broaden their appeal with working class voters in critical Rust Belt states. But his Republican VP challenger, J.D. Vance, says there's no substance behind the vibes.
The idea that somehow the Democrats are the joyful party, there's a lot of attacks on Donald Trump, a lot of criticisms of what he's done and what he's said, not a whole lot of positive vision for how Kamala Harris is going to fix the problems that plague the country.
Walz already rankled Republicans by calling them weird and leaned into his coaching background to motivate Democrats.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Later tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris will accept her party's nomination to lead the ticket. Richard Madden, CBC News, Chicago.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has toured the country's northeast border. It is his first visit to the area since Ukrainian forces their cross-border operation into Russia's Kursk region. Zelensky says troops captured one more Russian village in the area. The incursion into Kursk has given a major morale boost to the Ukrainian military. The months before showed slow but steady Russian gains in the east. Zelensky also says since the Kursk operation, there has been a decrease in shelling and civilian deaths along that northeast border. Divers are still looking for one body off the coast of Sicily. The Italian Coast Guard is ferrying crews to the site of a sunken super yacht. The remains of 5 people have been discovered. Reuters is now reporting the body of British tech magnate Mike Lynch has been brought to shore. There are reports his 18-year-old daughter, Hannah, is still missing. The yacht went down during a storm early Monday. Investigators are looking into why the vessel sank so quickly. New data from BC health authorities shows the life expectancy among First Nations people has dropped from 73 to 67 years old. A report released this week shows the toxic drug crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic hit Indigenous populations harder than others. As Yvette Brend reports, advocates want more Indigenous representation in medicine.
The average life expectancy of First Nations people in BC has worsened since 2017.
Loss of 6.1 years, which is very dramatic.
Dr. Nell Wyman, Chief Medical Officer with the First Nations Health Authority, says Indigenous deaths are disproportionately high.
The major driver remains deaths due to the toxic drug crisis.
Rachel Plamondon Asu of the Wewokai Nation spent years on the streets battling addiction. She says harm reduction approaches, housing first, then counseling and detox, saved her life. But she says too many people can't get the care when they need it.
Their wait lists are insane, honestly. And that's why how our people are dying right now.
The 2021 data released Wednesday did show some modest progress in other areas related to education. For example, high school graduation rates and infant mortality trends. But the numbers also revealed where BC's health services are falling short.
We need to continue to push for more Indigenous, First Nations, Métis and Inuit people in leadership positions.
Wyman says BC needs to recruit more Indigenous nurses, midwives and doctors, especially given reports from people who avoid care, fearing racism. Yvette Brend, CBC News, Vancouver.
CBC News has obtained data revealing a staggering rise in security incidents in libraries across Canada. There's a growing number of incidents like aggressive behavior, verbal assaults, and suspected overdoses. As Kimberly Avenue reports, library staff on the front line say they're not equipped to keep up.
A hostile scene at a Toronto public library. A man waves a knife while police move in. Incidents like this one are on the rise in public libraries across the country.
Books thrown at staff. People get spit on, verbal assaults.
That's a librarian in Toronto. CBC isn't naming her because she's worried about facing repercussions at work for speaking out.
Didn't expect to be calling 911 every week.
CBC News obtained security incident data from public libraries in several Canadian cities. Between 2022 and 2023, Winnipeg public libraries saw a 21% increase in the number of incidents. Vancouver, a 14% increase. And Toronto, 71%, about 45 incidents happening per week across Toronto branches, with suspected overdoses up more than 500%. Some libraries have tried to quell the spike. Winnipeg's main branch installed a walk-through metal detector last year. Some locations in Toronto and Vancouver are working with social workers. But according to U of T Library Sciences professor Siobhan Stevenson,
this is not a library problem. This is a political problem. This is a social problem.
She says this is happening because cities and provinces aren't spending enough money on social programs. CBC News reached out to the City of Toronto. In a statement, a spokesperson said they are committed to finding ways to address the growing crisis, but only cited measures currently in place. Kimberly Ivany, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Heavily in downtown Winnipeg right now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a wet Thursday start. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio on CBC. 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube this morning. So you've just been hearing the developing news overnight about the rail stoppage. This hour, we are going to talk to Barry Prentice at 7:40 live. He's professor of supply chain management at the University of Manitoba. So what does this specifically mean for our province, for goods moving out of the province, for things coming into the province, for people moving north in the province? So what is affected here? So stay tuned for that local lens on this national story coming up at 7:40. In addition, this hour on the program, does our legal system do enough to protect victims of intimate partner violence? Our CMP say the recent triple homicide in McCreary was a, quote, horrific act of intimate partner violence. We'll have that conversation coming up. And in the backdrop of that, I just want to remind everyone that advocates across this country when it comes to domestic violence have used the word epidemic when they talk about, the lack of services for people. So stay tuned. We'll talk about that. Right now, though, with another story that's developing today, Matt Humphrey is in.
Yeah, some Winnipeg cyclists want the province to change traffic laws to allow them to slow roll through stop signs. It's called the Idaho Stop, named after the state, which implemented it more than 40 years ago, the law. Advocate Hillary Rosentreter says laws requiring cyclists to come to a full stop at a stop sign put them in danger.
The problem with this safety measure not being legal is that you're essentially criminalizing safety. The main reason why cyclists implement and use the Idaho Stop is to keep themselves safe, to clear the intersection, to avoid potential interactions with cars as much as possible.
We'll hear more from Rosentreter at the bottom of the hour, and we'll hear more about the massive rail strike as picket lines go up across the country this morning. We'll hear from the head of the Wheat Growers Association, who farms just west of Winnipeg. He, of course, is extremely concerned as we are now in the midst of harvest. He wants the federal government to step in. More at the bottom of the hour.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
We're asking you what your thoughts are on the rail strike, what you're worried about, how you might be affected by this. You can weigh in a number of ways. You can write to us on Facebook. That's my Marcy Marcusa page during the show. You can call us at 788-3205, or you can email radio893@cbc.ca. Well, let's get into this wet forecast with Chloe Friesen.
Hello. Yeah, currently raining here at Portage and Spence. A lot of raindrops on the window outside. We're looking at showers or thunderstorms continuing into the afternoon. 30% chance late this afternoon with the risk of thunderstorms. So this rain could continue. Looking at a high of 25 with humidex 33 degrees. Currently, it's 19 at the Forks. We are seeing showers in a few other spots here in Manitoba. Portage, light rain shower at the moment. As well, Dauphin, you're looking at light rain. And I will have a more in-depth look at the forecast coming up later here on the show. The commute, you'll need your windshield wipers going. But other than that, if there's anything getting in your way, 204-788-3093.
Well, as you just heard Matt mention in headlines, some cycling advocates in our city are calling on the provincial government to legalize the Idaho Stop here in Manitoba. It is the traffic law first legalized in the state of Idaho that's known pretty much as the stop as yield, as Matt explained. So cyclists will treat stop signs as yields and slowly be able to continue rolling through, and red light signals as stop signs. Now, a group identifying themselves as concerned members of the cycling community of Winnipeg has sent a letter now to members of Manitoba's provincial government. They want to change policy here, and they have a rally plan for later today, as Matt had in headlines. We have the Premier on in the next hour. We'll try to get a question to him about this. But first, let's just stop for a moment. And pardon the pun, but what is an Idaho Stop? Our next guest is here to talk about it. Chuck Glover is a national examiner for CanBike Canada and a former police officer with 40 years experience. Now, he's also a recognized cycling expert in Supreme Courts of British Columbia and Alberta. Glover's in favor of cyclists using the Idaho Stop, but also says he has concerns if it were to become law. We've reached him in Maple Ridge, BC. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm well. So let's just do the quick notes first. How does the Idaho Stop work?
Basically, what it does is the cyclist does not have to stop or does not stop at a stop sign. They do not put their foot down. They continue to roll through it at, hopefully, if they're going to do that, at 2 or 3 kilometers an hour, not at 10 or 15 or 20 kilometers an hour, as seems to end up being the case.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you're raising that because you have concerns about it. So, why is this? Let's stay there for a moment. Why is the speed at which a cyclist might, do the Idaho stop an issue?
Well, speed becomes very critical in the whole matter. What it said, your advocate had said, you're criminalizing safety. Well, no, not really. The cyclist is slowing down. Hopefully they're looking around and stopping as required. But if they continue to roll through, they're not watching for the cars that are there. The cars aren't watching for them. The car drivers are making the presumption that the cyclist is going to stop, and rather than just doing that 2 or 3 kilometers an hour. And then probably the other side of that is when they're doing 2 or 3 kilometers an hour and saying, well, we don't have to stop. Well, now the slippery slope, well, if 2 or 3 is okay, 5 is okay. Well, if 5 is okay, 10 is okay. And they'll continue through, and they're going to start getting into spots they shouldn't be, and they're going to get into problems safety-wise and experience-wise and riding-wise that they may not be anticipating.
Is that at the heart of your concern if this were to become law?
That is part of it. The other part is, and I'm going to go back to put on my retired policing hat, that at point when, if you're doing an officer's investigating an accident and a cyclist is involved, the stop sign is there, I always made the presumption that the cyclist stopped. That they stopped, and then they went through, and then whatever happened, and they crash. With the Idaho stop, the presumption now will go back to saying, well, the cyclist didn't stop, so the presumption will be that now there's more fault can be attributed to the cyclist, even though it may not be correct, but all of a sudden now the cyclist is part of their own demise or their own problem that they've created by not stopping. E-bikes may bring that into another more devastating fact because now e-bikes, they'll continue rolling through, and e-bikes roll a whole lot faster than regular bikes.
Just to look at this from another perspective, I mean, aren't a lot of, I know we're talking about making this law, and it's not law anywhere in Canada, I should mention, I don't believe, but aren't a lot of cyclists, doing this already, kind of rolling through?
They are, and I must admit that I'm one that has done it before and done it semi-regularly at certain stop signs. But at other stop signs, I know that if I try doing that, I'm going to put myself in real jeopardy. It becomes a problem because people are going to they're going to go faster and faster rather than it's a law. Mm-hmm. If I push it through at 1 or 2 kilometers an hour, people will turn their head and say, okay, well, I can live with that. But they're going to say, well, now I can go through. I don't have to stop. And they'll presume that everybody else is going to stop for them.
I wonder if you could respond to what some of the advocates for this are saying. They are saying just that it would keep momentum going. You wouldn't have to come to a full stop on your bike, put your foot down, and then all of a sudden have to rev back up again. They're saying that can be a point of danger for people on a bike. What's your response to that?
Part of that part is a lack of cycling knowledge and a lack of knowing how to use your gears, slowing down, getting your gears properly set up so you can ride away safely. If you're using a heavy gear where you're having almost a 1-to-1, that you come to a stop sign, you put your foot down, you stop. Now you have to really push and hard to get going again. And you're standing up on your pedals, you're trying to drive through, you're putting your head down, you're not looking. That's part of the not knowing how to gear properly and how to set up for intersections properly, looking ahead, getting the big picture, situational awareness. It's a lack of cycling knowledge. Part of that is what they're talking about. And that's unfortunate. We say I've been riding a bike for 50 years. What are you going to teach me? There's lots to learn, and gearing is one of them. How many times have I heard people say to me, oh, I have 24 gears on my bike and I can use all 4 of them.
In terms of where this is in place, as I mentioned, this is not in place across Canada, but there was a push to adopt the Idaho stop where you are in BC. What happened with it?
The people that were trying to push for it, the Hub, which is the cycling advocacy out of Vancouver, and the BC Cycling Coalition also tried picking it up. I was on the board of directors of the BC Cycling Coalition at the time, and I brought up the same concerns. cyclists are going to ride through, and they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience, they don't have the ability to do it safely. And if 3 is okay, 5 would be okay, 8 and 10, and they're going to go too quick. And traffic is now moving so much quicker now than it was in the past.
If we look at the history of the Idaho stop, obviously it's named for Idaho, as we said, so they do have this in law in some states. Do we have any data to support if it has been safer or more dangerous for cyclists in any of those cities, or is that not something that's yet compiled?
It is compiled. There is at least one study, that's what I'm looking for. There is one study that shows that it says that injuries decrease from it. Well, it may be, but if in downtown Winnipeg people are blowing through the lights or blowing through the stop signs, now more people are getting injured. The other side of it too, there's also studies and information coming out with e-bikes, that e-bikes are moving quicker and there's many more accidents and intersections. And then that's right now because they're supposed to stop. If they are allowed to continue on, the speeds are going to get higher, the accidents are going to go up, and the severity of the accident and the injuries are going to go up.
So in your view, this it would be dangerous to put this in law, or am I overstating that?
No, that pretty much covers it. If someone were asked me to say, would you vote for it, yes or no, my answer would be no.
Just lastly, I mean, obviously in Winnipeg here, we have seen, listeners will know, and that's why I'm saying obviously, we have seen many accidents involving cyclists this summer, including a fatality that prompted a lot of the advocacy that's followed here. We had a fatal hit and run and collision in the same neighborhood in Crescentwood just weeks apart this summer. I'm wondering whether or not something like the Idaho stop can apply in any city, or how you would view it in a city like Winnipeg's, where we don't have cycling infrastructure that has connectivity on all of our major roadways yet. It's sort of patchy. Does the Idaho stop work better in cities that are fully developed for cyclists, or if you could look at it through that lens?
If you take a look at the infrastructure, and you're right, Winnipeg is working on it. Vancouver seems at times to be ahead. Victoria seems to be ahead. And if you're in a bike lane and you're moving through, the signs are up saying that the cars are to yield to cyclists in the bike lane. If you don't have a bike lane, then, as John Forrester had said, cyclists are to be treated as vehicles. Therefore, you do the same things the cars do. Do we accept that cars can roll through stop signs or can roll through lights? No, we don't, because we as cyclists want to be treated with respect and want to be treated as an equal, then we need to do what the rules say. You're trying to change a rule to make it easier for the cyclist. Everybody should be treated the same. Isn't that what we're after?
Well, we'll see what listeners have to say, but your perspective has been valued this morning on the show, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling, Marcy. Have a great day.
You as well. That's Chuck Glover. He's a national examiner for CanBike Canada. He's a former police officer. He's a recognized cycling expert in Supreme Courts of British Columbia and Alberta. And as you heard, he is in favor of cyclists using the Idaho stop in some cases. He says he even uses it depending on the intersection, but he has big concerns if it were to become law. He's not in favor of that. Now, CBC reached out to Winnipeg Police for a comment regarding the current traffic laws for cyclists at stop signs, and a spokesperson said, quote, cyclists are bound by the Highway Traffic Act and required to stop at all stop signs and red traffic lights. At a stop sign, they would proceed when it's their turn to do so after coming to a complete stop. At a red traffic light, they are to stop till they have a green light, and like all other traffic, proceed when it's safe to do so. The Highway Traffic Act Section 85 disobey traffic control device will be applicable for infraction of that nature. The fines, $203. There are no provisions right now, they go on to say in the Highway Traffic Act, to treat stop signs as yields for any vehicle, including cyclists, end quote. So this is in the news today. Later today, we expect a rally on the streets advocating to have the Idaho stop be part of law here. So we hope to ask the Premier about this in the next hour of the show. We're asking you now to weigh in, 788-3205.
Our community.
Those who shape this place come from all walks of life.
Some of us you hear every day.
And others are working hard to make Manitoba a better place.
The movers and shakers.
The change makers. The people making a difference.
And CBC Manitoba is where you'll hear their stories.
CBC Winnipeg News at 6.
Information radio. Up to speed.
Radio News. CBC.ca/Manitoba.
Watch, listen, experience Manitoba.
It is 7:25 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on the app or YouTube. Lots of rain downtown. It's steady. It's dark with cloud cover, and that's going to continue. We have these showers, possible thunderstorms still this morning, and then late in the day, it could get wet again, so it might come and go through the day. A high of 25 with humidex. It's going to feel like 33. It's also raining in Brandon still, and there's fog up in Thompson right now. Well, let's get to morning sports, and let's start with baseball with Paul McGowan with us once again this morning. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Marcy.
So one of the best Canadians ever to play has decided to retire.
And it's funny, I want to call him Blue Jays first baseman Joey Votto, but Votto never ends up playing a game for the Blue Jays. But he was the face of the Cincinnati Reds for most of the last 17 years. He was incredible, a terrific eye at the plate. He got on base, he hit for power. He was also one of the most colorful characters in the game, and he announced his retirement in the most Joey Votto way possible. He's been playing with the Blue Jays AAA affiliate in Buffalo, and without any warning, without a press conference, without a tweet from the team, Votto posted a short video to Instagram yesterday from a random Buffalo parking lot.
That's it. I'm done. I am officially retired from baseball.
Very on brand for a guy who once documented his entire commute to his weekly chess club meeting. Joey Votto done with baseball after 17 seasons, very likely to be the third Canadian ever elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame.
And just because we're on the sport, a little shout out to our slow pitch team from CBC Manitoba that didn't do that great, but wrapped their season last night. They won one game, and they had great spirits. I thought you were going to say
they won the championship or something.
They won the Spirit Award. That's okay. Well, I'm giving it to them anyway. All right. So the thought was, just back to Votto, that Votto might be called up to the Jays. And as a feel-good story in the middle of a disappointing season, then what happened?
I think Votto said it best himself in the caption to that video. He said, quote, "I'm just not good anymore." When he signed with the Jays in the spring, he said, "I'm going to earn my way onto the team." And he just was not able to do that at 40 years old. His hitting stats at AAA Buffalo are very bad. And so, it would have been nice to see him as a Blue Jay. The thought was he might come up and play this week against his former team, the Reds. I don't know if Joey Votto, though, would have wanted a spot in the lineup that he didn't earn. This is a guy who loves the game of baseball. And to illustrate that, I want to play you this clip of Joey Votto talking about facing former Blue Jay Roy Halladay in the playoffs. Now, for context, Halladay was in the middle of pitching a no-hitter against Votto's Reds.
What I was thinking before that at bat, I need to throw him off in such a way that maybe he gets rattled and hits me. So I call timeout. I take a pitch or two and I say, I'm going to call timeout again. And next year at the All-Star game, he said, "Hey, remember when you called timeout twice during that at bat? I wanted to kill you." If I could have, I would have walked to home plate and choked you to death.
Joey Votto, one of a handful of players who could have that much fun with that interaction.
No kidding.
I would say the game will miss him. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't know that he's said this on the record, but it's hard not to picture him in a broadcast booth in the near future.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
Such a good storyteller.
Let's play some bets right now. We won't make much money off it, though, I don't think. Let's go to golf. An important tournament's coming up in Colorado.
Well, one of the last before next month's President's Cup, which is being held in Montreal. And so you have golfers like Canadian Corey Connors who are hoping to force their way above the automatic cutoff for that tournament. But also, in Colorado, so 6,200 feet above sea level, Connors says that that's going to require some changes.
Playing at elevation here, there's definitely some adjustments that need to be made. The ball is flying quite a bit further than it does normal weeks on the PGA Tour. And I feel like, my background in math at university is definitely going to come in handy, crunching some numbers here this week. But I think I've got it figured out, flying 10 or 15% further, depending on the shot.
It's hard to tell because you can't see Corey Connors smiling there, but that is a joke. His background is in actuarial math. He's been called a math genius, but actuarial math qualifies you to work in insurance as opposed to, calculate the trajectory of a golf ball. But his point is well made. Hard to worry about sinking putts if you are overshooting the green by 30 yards. We'll see how well he and the rest of the field adjust. Corey Connors tees off just after 11 a.m. this morning.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marcy.
That's Paul McGowan, who's filling in for Scott Regehr with Morning Sports. Your commute's been fine but wet this morning. 788-3093 if you do need to reach us. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at the show this morning. Brad Lillies, Chloe Friesen, and Sierra Sanders. We'll go to Matt Humphrey in a moment in the news department. I will mention we have a live interview coming up after Matt's news, and that is with Barry Prentice, who will join us to talk about the developments that Matt will fill us in on that have happened overnight in the work stoppage at the railways. So stay tuned. That live interview coming up after your CBC Winnipeg news.
This is CBC News. At 7:30, it's 19 degrees and hazy in Norway House, Cree Nation, 19 degrees and rainy over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning. I'm Matt Humphrey. At the top of the news, for the first time in Canada, freight traffic on our two largest railways has simultaneously ground to a halt. After bitter negotiations, CN Rail and CPKC locked out 9,300 engineers, conductors, and yard workers after the parties failed to agree on a new contract. This means extra stress for Manitoba farmers in the middle of harvest season. Most grain moves by rail. Gunter Joham is president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association. He farms just west of Winnipeg. And just 3 days into harvest, Joham calls the rail situation very concerning. He says most farmers don't have room to store what they harvest, and the elevators will soon be full.
There potentially is problems with storage. Then also we cannot haul our grain to the elevator. If we don't haul, we don't get paid. We have huge bills from growing this crop that we need to pay here in the fall. It's a catastrophe unfolding.
Joham wants the federal government to intervene. Combined, the rail companies haul roughly $1 billion in goods each day. The latest details about last week's triple homicide in McCreary has a nearby shelter asking everyone to take intimate partner violence more seriously. Mounties say the victims were the parents and brother of a 37-year-old woman the suspect used to date. She managed to escape. Court documents show the woman was granted a protection order from her ex last year, but the suspect breached that order many times. Carrie Prodzik is executive director of the Parkland Crisis Center in Dauphin. She says intimate partner violence is more prevalent than people may think.
It, of course, impacted our community and surrounding communities. It's something people never want to hear. However, it is a reality, and we have to stand up and be vigilant and just be aware that it is happening.
Mounties say this is the second time in the past 6 months intimate partner violence in Manitoba has resulted in multiple deaths. In February, 5 members of a family in Carman were killed, including 3 young children. A Jewish leader isn't surprised her synagogue received a bomb threat yesterday. A threatening email was sent early yesterday morning to dozens of Jewish institutions across Canada. Here in Winnipeg, 4 city synagogues were targeted, including Sherry Zedek Synagogue. Executive Director Rina Sector Al-Bays says the Israel-Hamas war has led to a rise in anti-Semitism. And she isn't surprised her synagogue was targeted.
There's a terrible climate of hatred right now. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, they have had physical threats to their building. There was a firebombing, there were stones thrown, there was shooting into windows. So I wasn't surprised. It was just, when is our turn?
After learning of the threat, the congregation quickly evacuated the Temple Shalom building they're currently using temporarily. Winnipeg police say the targeted buildings have been searched and everything is safe at this time. Today is the last day members of the Air Canada Pilots Union are voting on a potential strike mandate. Voting began on August 13th. The union says retirement, scheduling concerns, and compensation are among the main issues. Air Canada says talks have progressed and it hopes to finalize a deal in the next few weeks. If the pilots give their union a strike mandate, job action could begin as early as September 17th. And as you've been hearing, some Winnipeg cyclists have planned a rally this evening. They say laws requiring a complete stop at stop signs puts them in danger because it forces them to wait at intersections where they're in the path of oncoming traffic. They want to be able to slow down but go through a stop sign without stopping if there's no oncoming traffic, treating it the same as a yield sign, for example. Hillary Rosentreter is one of the organizers. She says rally participants will ride their bikes through the Wolseley neighborhood following the letter of the law, single file, and stopping at every stop sign.
What it means is you'll see cyclists spending more time in intersections, which is actually extending the time that they could potentially be hit by a driver. But it's just intended to kind of make it very visible what the Highway Traffic Act is asking of cyclists.
The rally will start at 5 tonight at the corner of Westminster Avenue and Walnut Street. And that is your CBC News from Winnipeg.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Well, we know it's raining downtown because we can see it, but we also know it's raining in Charleswood because Connie, thanks for listening, wrote to us to say it's really coming down with the rest of the forecast details and your morning commute details as well. Chloe Friesen is in at 7:35 a.m. Chloe.
Good morning. We could see this rain continue here in Winnipeg, actually. Just looking at the hourly weather report from Environment Canada, it looks like the rain will take a little bit of a break after just the early afternoon, but it might return during your 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock hour. And for folks going to the Burt Block party, bring an umbrella? ? Today in Winnipeg, looking at mainly cloudy skies, showers right now downtown. We could see 30% chance of showers later this afternoon, as I mentioned, along with a risk of thunderstorms. Wind south 20, a high of 25, with the humidex could feel more like 33. It's currently 19 at the Forks. Right now in Brandon, we are looking at misty skies, 19 degrees. We could see showers or thunderstorms ending this morning and then clearing skies. A high of 25 with humidex feeling like 30 degrees. In Dauphin at the moment, we are looking at light rain as well, 16 degrees. You could see a mix of sun and cloud coming later after these thunderstorms end this morning, when becoming west 30. High of 25 in Dauphin with the humidex feeling more like 31. And in Thompson, we're looking at misty skies, 13 degrees, pretty cool in Thompson at the moment. Rain could begin early this afternoon. Risk of a thunderstorm as well. Could amount to 20 millimeters of rain. Wind becoming north 20 late this afternoon. A high of 22 with the humidex feeling like 27. Other than wet, the commute seems like it's all right out there. But if something is getting in your way, or you just have something that you think your fellow commuters should know about, you can give us a call at 204-788-3093.
All right, thanks, Chloe. Well, let's continue to dig into the implications of today's top story across this country, the unprecedented railway strike. Why unprecedented? Well, because as you might recall, we did have a CN strike in 2019, an 8-day work stoppage there. But this is the first time we've had both major railways stopped in Canada. In a moment, a live interview about the supply chain from a Manitoba perspective. But first, let's revisit what we heard about some of the concerns. This is Jo Verwey, the president of Keystone Agricultural Producers. She was on CBC yesterday with Laurie Hoogstraten on Radio Noon.
There just simply isn't enough trucking capacity in our country to accommodate this. The rail is the most efficient, the most safe way to transport our goods effectively and at the most cost effective way. And to have this impact right now in the fall could mean a lot of dollars lost, as well as, at the end of the day, the reputation of Canada as a reliable source of grain internationally. That is going to hurt our country dramatically if this continues. So rail is the only safe and affordable way to transport goods. If you look at the other infrastructures that we have in Canada, the availability of trucks and labor to transport goods with trucks or something other than rail is simply additional cost, and we just don't. The resources aren't there to accommodate for that.
Jo Verwey, the president of Keystone Agricultural Producers, talking about some of the concerns that she has about the railway lockout that has happened. Barry Prentice is with us this morning, professor of supply chain management at the Asper School of Business at the University of Manitoba. Hi there, Barry.
Hi.
So we've been talking about the fact that this is unprecedented. I was referring to the 8-day strike that happened, but that was only one railway. I'm wondering what the greater concern might be, because this is both railways now, and what people should understand about the gravity of that.
Well, certainly in the case of the grain industry, everything stops. And that's a very bad time of year for this to happen, because we're now moving into the harvest. And as the interview just before me said, this is unprecedented for them. and trucks simply can't move it. They're stuck, and we've got to get the railways back into action. So this puts the ball into the government's court now.
Puts the ball into the government's court, meaning back to work legislation.
Well, yeah, if the two parties aren't going to decide, there's an old statement that hope is not a strategy, and it seemed to be like that's what the government was expressing yesterday, is that they're hoping they'll get the resolution, and it doesn't happen. So now, I guess you could say the adults have to come in now and sort this out if the two parties aren't going to come to a resolution. And they better work on it pretty quick. So I guess I would say part of the strategy is they're already looking at how do they do that.
How will this affect producers in Manitoba? And if you could also speak to the north, because a lot of people think about the north and they think about railways, but that's different rail lines, I understand, or different things that are moving.
Yeah, the biggest impact will be here in the south, obviously. The grain movement is the biggest one, but also intermodal containers is a big part of what the railways move. So, CP and KCS, about a quarter of all their freight is grain and fertilizer. So those two are going to be affected quite substantially. And then containers are another roughly quarter of what moves. So there's a big impact on those two right away. As for the north, they're actually somewhat immune. The Hudson's Bay Railway is not going to be on strike, and they do depend on things going up to Churchill, but it's a pretty small part of the total scheme of things.
When you think of the average person, or you think of the cost of certain foods, what impacts might there be on those areas?
Well, what the railways moves is basically raw materials and bulk products. So I don't think there's going to be too much impact per se on the cost of food. Now, obviously, if the railway rates go up, that could affect certain things that are being moved, but it'll take a long time for that to move its way through the marketplace. So I don't think consumers are going to see too much evidence of change. What might happen, of course, is those containers that aren't arriving, there's hit and miss. Certain things are just not going to show up because they didn't get through. So there could be shortages of who knows what, basketball hoops. Whatever was on that container didn't get through.
How long can a full grain elevator sit there?
Well, it can sit there forever. It just can't move any grain. And once the elevator is full, that's it. And I know that the grain companies are already saying, no more, thank you, because they don't want to plug the system up so they can't get started again. I think everybody is looking at, how do we get this system rolling again? And indeed, you can't just turn the railway on and off on a dime. They've been taking some days already to wind down. That's why the lockout. But it'll take time to get it back up again. And, for every day lost, they claim it takes at least a week for the railway to catch up. So depending how long this lasts, it could be a couple of months. Could easily be the congestion in the rail system.
To look at this from the labor perspective for just a moment, I mean, there's 9,300 workers at CN and CPKC going out. And I alluded to that 2019 work stoppage from CN only at the time. But the reason I'm raising that is because we're in a different time when it comes to unions, and we're seeing that. And obviously these two groups, two railways have come together to make their point. What sense do you make of that? We're in this moment that this actually could maybe not be resolved quickly because, the unions may really stand their ground, as we've been seeing, really all over the world, but across North America in this moment in time.
Well, certainly all unions are pressing for more wages. Everyone wants to catch up with inflation, and that's quite understandable. In this case, though, it's also coming down to an issue of work practices, for lack of a better word. How do the railways operate 24/7 and live with the rules that the government has on work time and so on, keep the railways running and do it in a fashion that's efficient? And we don't know all the details of what's going on in the background, but those are some of the big issues that are being discussed and seem to be the blocking issues right now.
Anything to add this morning, Barry, about that I might not have asked about how Manitoba will be impacted?
Well, the question always is how long will this last? And in the past, what we've seen is the government eventually has to pull Parliament together and pass legislation and force the system back into action. That has taken 8 days, as you mentioned in the past, so 7 to 10 days. I think this will have to be resolved. It just is simply too great an impact on the economy to just ignore this and try to hope that the workers and the railways will find a solution. So I think the government is now being forced to act.
Thanks for your time, as always. Appreciate it.
Yep, fine.
That's Barry Prentice. He's professor of supply chain management at the Asper School of Business at the University of Manitoba. If you want to weigh in on your concerns or how you might be impacted by this lockout, the strike, you can call us at 788-3205.
The CBC News app delivers the answers you want to know and need to know.
What an extraordinary scene.
The breaking stories that shape your world. Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We're just approaching Gaza.
Your source for mobile news. Delivered when you want, where you want.
This situation has changed very quickly.
The CBC News app. Download for free.
And just for clarity here, the rail lines locked out their workers last night, so work stoppage. I just want to get my language correct. 7:45 a.m. is the time right now on 89.3, 9:90 a.m. on the app or YouTube, and we got a bit of music this morning. You might be pretty excited. You might need an umbrella, as Chloe said, but you might be pretty excited if you're heading out to the Burt Block Party tonight. It starts in downtown Winnipeg, and different bands on stage for the next 3 days. So tonight it's the Sky Diggers and Blue Rodeo in Indian City. But man, what a talented family we're going to talk about next, because yesterday we talked to Jay Bodner, who is a member of Indian City. Well, his son, Jace Bodner, also sometimes now plays with a band, but also has his own work. And we played a lot of his music in the past. We pulled a cool song this morning from his recent EP called Don't Ruin the Love. This is local artist Jace Bodner and Maisie.
Maisie, what you say and do are different things. You're like Inception, girl, you're confusing. And I don't understand, wish I could hear you clearer. Oh, honey, you said you love me, then you let me go. Should I believe that? Was it really true? Or was it simply you saying what I wanna hear? Oh, Maisie, why did you have to come into my life and change it? Maisie, I didn't ask you, claw into my heart and take it. Oh, Maisie, was it your plan to walk over the love I gave you? 'Cause I love you more than I've loved before, and I really thought that you loved me too. Maisie, I've always been a man of compromise. I've always tried to see the other side, but I just can't this time. Are you kidding me? Oh, Maisie, why did you have to come into my life and change it? Oh, Maisie, I didn't ask you, baby. Claw into my heart and take it. Yeah, Maisie, what did you plan to walk over the love that I gave you? 'Cause I love you more than I've loved before, and I really thought that you loved me
Maisie from Jace Bodner. A little local music for you this morning. And there's more local to come. Indian City's going to take the stage tonight at the Burt Block Party. And then, of course, there's some big old school stars in town to round out the rest of the weekend if you're going. Enjoy. By the way, we did end up picking a winner for someone won tickets yesterday on the show, and we contacted them off air. So if you were wondering if it was you and we haven't called you, then not this time. But we'll have more local We'll have more local tickets and contests to come. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. It's 11 minutes now to 8 o'clock. It's 19 and it is raining in downtown Winnipeg. It's let up a little bit, however, in this moment. Well, let's go to the news of the day here. If you were to ask Carrie Prodzic to describe the current state of domestic violence in our province in a word, she would say epidemic. Carrie's executive director of Parkland Crisis Centre and Women's Shelter in Dauphin. Her shelter is a 51-minute drive from McCreary, and that is where, as you likely know, 3 people were killed in what RCMP call a horrific act of intimate partner violence. But it's the only domestic violence shelter in the area. In an update yesterday, RCMP said victims were related to the suspect's former partner and that she had a protection order against him. Carrie says it's the news that the community is coming to grips with now, and she shared more with CBC's Chidi Akuma.
When we became aware of the news in our community, it, of course, impacted our community and surrounding communities. It's something people never want to hear. However, it is a reality, and we have to stand up and be vigilant and just be aware that it is happening. It is very prevalent in our communities. I think we need to take domestic violence a lot more seriously. I think there's been a stigma attached to it for so many years. It is very prevalent. It is out there. We need to talk about it. We need to take action. I think government needs to stand up, and we need to address this.
That's Carrie Prodzic, Executive Director of the Parkland Crisis Centre and Women's Shelter in Dauphin. And speaking of government, the Premier's live on our show after 8 o'clock. We will ask him about how we can do better. My next guest, though, joining us live now via Zoom is Sungai Movingi Van Landegem. She's with the Manitoba Association for Women's Shelters. Good morning.
Morning, Marcy. Thank you for speaking with me this morning.
Thank you for being with us. I mean, we have been using the word epidemic when it comes to domestic violence across the country and in this province for some time now. What's your reaction, and how are you doing with what happened in the aftermath now of McCreary?
Just heartbroken and disheartened. I think a lot of families and communities are experiencing this, especially the survivor and her family. My heart goes out to them. No words can ever show the gravity of what she and her family are going through and what that community is experiencing. And unfortunately, intimate partner violence and family violence continue to rise. And along with this increase, we're also seeing an escalation in the levels of violence.
We know now that the victims, as I mentioned, were parents and the brother of the suspect's former common law partner. We also know court documents show she was granted a protection order last year. What is your thought on that and how effective protection orders are in the real world?
Protection orders are complex. A protection order is a tool for the legal system, but we're finding it's not effective for people fleeing violence. It is a piece of paper that unfortunately does not always stop violence because it's only as good if enforced. And law enforcement can't always enforce them for various reasons, including limited resources, as both the legal and justice systems are also stretched thin. There is also jurisdictional limitations depending on the community. I think there also needs to be an understanding that protection orders may actually worsen situations, as abusers may not want to lose the control over their victims, so they escalate the level of violence. The challenge then becomes, how do you enforce these protection orders with limited resources? There's limitations in safe spaces and shelters and community resource centers, safe and affordable housing, accessible transportation, especially in rural and remote communities, mental health and substance use supports, and the list goes on and on. I mean, we've had women tell us that they plan to go into hiding when the protection order is issued, as they know there will be backlash. So these need to be taken a lot more seriously in the enforcement behind it if these are the only tools being used.
You've raised a lot of concerns there. Where would you start? One of the things that stood out for me from what you just said, Sungai, was not enough safe spaces if people are to look for somewhere to go. And it's just in this case, when we said that, the nearest shelter was a 51-minute away drive. I'm imagining that especially in rural areas that might, if I'm extrapolating here, mean safe spaces where people are.
Yes, absolutely. Because the resources are so far spread out, it can be very challenging for victims or survivors to be able to find somewhere to go. As you mentioned, Parkland is 51-minute drive. But in addition to Parkland being far away, and this is not just in reference to Parkland, but many rural communities, there's also lack of accessible transportation. Some communities only have like one bus a week.
How do we
Many are fly in and fly out, so it really limits safe places that families can go to.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I wanted to ask you, how can we make sure the laws are better enacted?
I think that there needs to be better education, both in the legal system and justice system, as well as like in the community. I think being able to look at these situations and taking them even more seriously, that this, there's a heavy gravity in these situations, to make sure that there's other tools that are being implemented to make sure that families and survivors are kept safe. Again, a protection order is only a piece of paper, but without resources to enforce that piece of paper or that law, that legislation, there really isn't any reduction or any impact. So I think the first place to start is like both the education piece, as well as ensuring that there's other ways to enforce any laws or protection orders.
The Premier is going to be sitting in our studio live after 8 o'clock. Obviously, we're talking about the case out of McCreary, but Manitobans are going to remember earlier this year the deaths of those 5 people, 4 children included in that in Carmen in February. It was also the result of intimate partner violence. Manitoba, in fact, has the second highest rate of intimate partner violence all across Canada. What do you need from this provincial government?
I think that there needs to be more education in the community. It isn't just for one sector to be working towards ending intimate partner violence. It has to be across the board. That means collaborations between the justice system, shelter systems, mental health systems, affordable housing. All of those different areas need to be working together. Working in silos is not going to solve the challenges and the issues that are coming up. We definitely do appreciate and recognize the efforts that the government is making in looking for solutions that are community driven, and welcome any support that they provide in helping diverse communities experiencing intimate partner violence. But there also needs to be a way to remove that stigma, because it is still unfortunately prevalent in community and in some of the systems. For instance, the process to get a protection order is very long and complicated. We have protection order designates in our shelters and many of the organizations working in the sector, but even then the process is so long and complicated, many women actually just give up.
Got it.
And then there's the thought, well, even if I get it, if it's not going to do anything, why bother?
So coordination, communication, funding for shelters, lots of work to do, lots of things to ask the Premier about. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Marcy.
That's Sungai Movingi Van Landegem, who's the co-provincial coordinator of the Manitoba Association for Women's Shelters. I need to make a small correction here. I mentioned that case in Carmen, and it was 3 children, 1 teen, an adult. 3 children, 1 teen, and 1 adult who were killed there in that case. That was the total of 5 people. I believe I said 4 children. It is 2 minutes now to 8 o'clock, and Matt Humphreys in with headlines.
Good morning. The leadership at a Jewish congregation in Winnipeg says yesterday's bomb threat is frightening but not unexpected. Yesterday morning, a mass bomb threat was sent to institutions across Canada. One was Sherry Zedek in Winnipeg. Police say the targeted buildings were searched. Everything is safe right now. And the executive director at Sherry Zedek at the synagogues thinks the email was meant to scare her congregation, but she says they won't give in to the fear. More news after World Report.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
The rain is it's a little lighter, but it's still very, very wet out there in Winnipeg, and we're expecting these showers or a possible thunderstorm to continue for us this morning and maybe late in the day too. A high of 25 with humidex 33. Right now it's 19. The drive, walk, or roll beyond being wet is pretty good. No major problems to report. 788-3093 if you do want to reach us. And so after 8 o'clock on the program, Premier Wab Kinew here for our monthly interview, and between asking about domestic violence, an announcement we're expecting on birth control in this province today, as well as what's happening on the rail lines, changes with cycling. We've got quite a conversation coming up. Stay with us for the premiere.
Today on Q.
I'm Talia Schlanger, sitting in for Tom Power. Josh Ramsey is the lead singer of the band Mariana's Trench. He joins me to talk about going big with epic high notes and huge arrangements on the band's new album, plus how depression and addiction have shaped his art.
Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts. The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current.
I'm Connie Walker. Trains have stopped across Canada at an unprecedented scale. Shippers have been preparing for this since the winter, but say trucks and other alternatives aren't enough to fill the gap. That's coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. Canada's biggest railways are shut down in an unprecedented labour dispute. Both CN Rail and CPKC have locked out their workers. Lengthy negotiations failed to come to a settlement by midnight last night. CBC business reporter Anis Hadari has the latest.
We need another one. Yeah, I know. There's a first time for everything. And on this picket line in Vancouver, that includes being there when both major Canadian railways locked out their workers at the same time. Around 9,300 employees between both Canadian Pacific, Kansas City, and Canadian National Railways are off the job. Their union, the Teamsters, and both companies didn't come to agreements by a deadline just past midnight Thursday morning Eastern Time. Both sides have accused the other of being unwilling to reach a deal. The companies have said they want an independent, third-party, binding arbitration to decide on contracts, something the union isn't on board with.
Contracts determined by binding arbitration tend to lean towards the employer's interests.
Jason Foster is a professor of human resources and labor relations at Athabasca University.
They've been asking for that for weeks. The federal government has been not prepared to do that.
It's costing Canadians money every minute.
Scott Crockett is with the Business Council of Alberta.
There is perishable food coming off Canadian farmers' crops today, tomorrow, and the next day that doesn't have a place to go to get to market. And that's going to decrease the value that farmers can get for their crops.
There are estimates that the economic damage is tens of millions of dollars each day. But if this is only a short dispute, businesses could make that up once it's resolved. In a statement, the Teamsters Union said it remains at the bargaining table, but also directed workers to start picketing in cities across Canada. Anis Hadari, CBC News, Calgary.
The rail shutdown will also affect commuters this morning. More than 30,000 people in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal will need to find another way into work. Commuter trains are not allowed to operate over CPKC's tracks while the railway is shut down. There will not be any traffic controllers to dispatch passenger trains. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will take center stage today in Chicago. It is the final day of the Democratic National Convention. Harris will make her big address as the presidential nominee. Her running mate, Tim Walz, had his turn last night. He accepted the party's vice presidential nomination. Following the convention for us in Chicago is the CBC's Ithel Musa. Ithel, what can we expect to hear from Harris today?
Democrats I've spoken to are concerned about issues like affordability. They want to see women get access to safe and legal abortions. They want policies to address homelessness and protections for members of the LGBTQ plus community. And they want to hear Kamala Harris speak to those issues. Another big one, dividing some progressives, is Israel's war with Hamas. Leaders of the uncommitted national movement held a sit-in outside the Democratic Convention last night after being told they could not speak on the main stage. The group emerged during the presidential primary. Some voters chose the uncommitted option on the Democratic ballot rather than voting for Joe Biden as their presidential nominee in protest. They want the U.S. to stop its military support of Israel.
Tim Walz spoke last night. What can you tell us?
Tim Walz is a man who has what I call real person appeal, and that's something that's really drawn in many Democrats. The former public school teacher spoke last night about his experience as a football coach, his time in the National Guard, and even his family's fertility struggles, all things the Republicans have questioned. Here's more from Walz last night.
When we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love. Freedom to make your own health care decisions. And yeah, your kids' freedom to go to school without worrying about being shot dead in the hall.
To many, Walz represents the Midwest, and that's important because those are the voters Democrats need to secure in the election this fall.
Thank you, Ethel.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Ethel Musa in Chicago. U.S. President Joe Biden says it's time to close the ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas. And he says he called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night to tell him that. Netanyahu is also under pressure from people within his country. Families of hostages want their loved ones back home. Our correspondent Sasha Petrusik has that story.
Under tight security, barely 2 kilometers from the Gaza border, the grief of hostage families. They buried 2 former hostages on the Nir Oz kibbutz, Abraham Munder and his son Ohad, Munder's nephew, Ayal Mor.
We know for sure that there were opportunities to sign a deal and release the hostages. Did not happen, did not occur, and this is very tragic. It does not deserve this kind of end.
Instead, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been stressing a military solution, as he did again at an airbase yesterday, boasting that the Air Force is Israel's iron fist against Hamas. This as talks aimed at coming up with a ceasefire deal falter in Cairo, despite efforts by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He left the region without the agreement President Joe Biden's been pushing, through a call to Netanyahu. Hamas is insisting that all troops leave Gaza, while Israel wants to continue to control parts of the territory, even once fighting stops. For the hostage families, it's not worth the lives of the remaining 100 or so, or those still alive in Gaza. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, on the Nir Oz kibbutz, Israel.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was greeted by his Polish counterpart in Warsaw this morning. Modi and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk are holding talks today. The two leaders are expected to sign strategic cooperation agreements covering cybersecurity and defense. Modi will travel to Kyiv tomorrow to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Life expectancy among First Nations people in British Columbia has worsened over the last several years. That is one of the main findings of a new report from the First Nations Health Authority. It says life expectancy dropped more than 6 years, falling from 73 years in 2017 to 67 years in 2021. Dr. Nell Wyman is Chief Medical Officer at the First Nations Health Authority.
The major driver remains deaths due to the toxic drug crisis public health emergency, which is now in its 9th year.
Researchers say the ongoing opioid crisis in BC and the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to the drop, but the report shows Indigenous populations have been more affected by both more than any other population. Dr. Wyman says BC needs to recruit more Indigenous medical professionals to encourage people in their communities to seek health care when they need it. It's been 6 months since Ottawa police violently arrested a young black man. It was a case of mistaken identity. CBC has obtained police reports that tell the story from the side of the officers involved. As Arthur White-Crummey reports, police paint a picture of fear in the confrontation with a man they thought was a dangerous murder suspect.
Constable Martin Corbet says he used reasonable force this February when he punched Kane Nyandagara in the face, hard enough to make his own hand bleed. He says the young black man was resisting arrest, tensing up his body, reaching for his waist. Corbet says he kneed him in the back 2 or 3 times to make him comply. But officers soon learned they had the wrong man when they compared Nyandagara with a photo of the suspect they were really looking for, a man named Bakal. Why did he run, they asked. Nyandagara told them he was scared and wanted to go home. Those details come from police reports released through a Freedom of Information request. They show that patrons and employees at a suburban Ottawa Starbucks called police multiple times to report sightings of a man they thought was Bakal, wanted for a shooting homicide in another neighborhood. Officers who rushed to the scene say they were worried the gun was still outstanding, and when they mistook Nyandagara for Bakal, they say he ignored commands and ran. Police confirmed they pointed firearms at Nyandagara and discharged a taser twice before Corbet tackled him to the ground, just a few blocks from the young man's home. The details in the police reports differ from what Nyandagara told CBC in March on a few key details.
He was pushing me, pushing my head, and
Nyandagara denies he was resisting. He says he dropped his hands in a shrug, as if to ask why police were yelling at him, with guns and tasers drawn as he walked home from a coffee shop. Arthur White-Crummey, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, it is a wet start to our morning here. It's kind of cut through the heat a little bit, at least. It's going to be wet through the day. Chance of showers and storms possible later. Thanks for joining us. That's what's happening in downtown Winnipeg. And that is where we're sitting. I'm Marcy Marcusa on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. So this morning, in this half hour on our program, we have Premier Wab Kinew, who is live in studio with us. He's going to be here for our regular monthly interview. And we have a lot to talk about. Of course, the developing national news that is unprecedented, both of Canada's two main railways now on strike. So we'll talk more about that and the impacts in Manitoba. Also, in the last half hour, we talked about the murder-suicide in McCreary. RCMP saying that this was a case of domestic violence, a horrific case in their language. What more can be done to keep people protected? And there's an announcement coming around birth control today. So we're going to hear more about that. That's in an unrelated story, but we'll hear more about that as well. We have a lot to talk about with Premier Wab Kinew, and that's up in just a moment. Right now, though, let's take a second to plug into our day in other ways. So Matt Humphrey is here with our headlines. Hi.
Good morning. Yes, as Marcy mentioned, the unprecedented rail stoppage began right in the middle of harvest season. The head of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association says it's an extremely stressful situation as most grain moves by train. In a first for Canada, again, CN Rail and CPKC simultaneously locked out 9,300 employees, stopping the shipping of nearly $1 billion a day in goods. And it happens on day 3 of the harvest. There are calls for the federal government to intervene. We'll hear more about that at the bottom of the hour. And a group of Winnipeg cyclists say current laws around stop signs put them at risk. They're holding a rally tonight calling on the provincial government to allow cyclists to treat stop signs as yield signs. As that is, if there's no oncoming traffic, you would have to slow down, but you don't need to stop completely at the stop sign. We'll hear more about that at the bottom of the hour.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Well, we're not at the bottom of the hour yet. It's 8:12 a.m. Let's dip into what's going on with this rainy day with Chloe. Hi.
Hello. Rain in the forecast for much of Manitoba. Right now, we are seeing that light rain here in the downtown, and we are looking at more rain later today. 30% chance of showers late this afternoon as well, with the risk of a thunderstorm. We're looking at a high of 25, with the humidex feeling more like 33. We do have rain in the forecast for Brandon, Dauphin, and Thompson. So get ready for a bit of a rainy day here in Manitoba. The commute has been very easy. I got a call about a stall, and then I got another call from the same person, Jeff with a G, that the stall was gone. So love it when those things just
fix themselves.
Thank you, Jeff. And if there's anything that is getting in your way on your commute today, give us a call, 204-788-3093.
8:13 a.m. is the time on CBC. Thanks for joining us wherever you're listening or watching. And let's get right into our conversation with Premier Wab Kinew, who is in studio for our monthly interview. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me back.
So we have a lot of news to get through. Let's start with the developments, Premier, if we may here. So obviously you're waking up like we all are, hearing that for the first time in our country's history, we've got both railways, that have a work stoppage. A lot of concerns in Manitoba. First, what would you say to producers who are worried about their crops here and, not being able to move their grain and other things?
Well, we've got your back, and we're talking to the federal government about how do we get the trains moving again. I mean, for the folks in the middle of harvest season, heading deeper into harvest season, it's a big concern about getting ag product to market, but it's also going to have an impact on input costs and just the overall uncertainty. When we look at our provincial economy, agriculture is the backbone directly, but also the value-added manufacturing sector that is built on top of the ag industry. And so to see this is really bad for our provincial economy, and it's irresponsible of these two countries to be these two companies rather. It's irresponsible for these two companies to be locking out their employees. The best place to get a deal is at the negotiating table. You know, the union is there. The workers, I think, have some legitimate points to make around safety and around the fact that everybody's going through this cost of living crisis right now. So we need the federal government to bring the situation to an end. And so this morning, waking up to the news, as you say, I'm on the phone with folks at the federal government in Ottawa saying we need action here to keep the economy moving and to get the trains running again.
What kind of action are you in favor of back to work legislation, and if so, how soon?
Well, because it's a lockout, it's on the company, right? So back to work legislation is what happens if there's a strike too often. And because we often hear of, the hammer being brought down on the workers in situations like that, so to speak, in this situation, why wouldn't we expect a strong response to force the companies that are behaving irresponsibly here? And so the federal government has tools at their disposal. I know there's been some conversation around binding arbitration, but I don't know if that's the right fit in this situation because you have a lot of detailed health and safety sort of considerations that bringing in an arbitrator at the 11th hour might not be the best resolution for.
And they've been talking for 9 months already.
They've been
so
talking.
One might question what that would do at this stage.
Right, exactly. So I think the federal government, with the tools that they have, this being a federally regulated part of the economy, they need to step in and just say, it's irresponsible to be trying to stop moving ag goods and energy products and the rest of the sectors of our economy that are depending on this at this time of year.
Just before we leave this topic, you said you were on the phone with Ottawa this morning. Were you on the phone? Who were you reaching out to there, connecting with?
I think I'll have more to say as the situation unfolds. I don't want to sort of...
We'll leave it there.
Yeah, speak about private conversations just yet, but rest assured we are on this and we want to see the trains moving.
I want to go to the terrible story out of McCreary, the murders and suicide there, the killings of 3 people. RCMP have said the ex-partner of Marlon Glover, CBC's now confirmed this is the man linked to the killings, had a protection order against him. Of course, in February this year, we had 5 other deaths in Carmen. Experts said there it was an example as well of domestic violence. I want you to hear just for a moment here from a guest we had on before 8. This is Sungai Movingi Van Landegem. She's with the Manitoba Association for Women's Shelters. We asked her what more the province might be able to do to help.
It has to be across the board. That means collaborations between the justice system, shelter systems, mental health systems, affordable housing. All of those different areas need to be working together. Working in silos is not going to solve, the challenges and the issues that are coming up.
She was referring there to, the idea of working in silos, also related to, Premier, the fact that there's a lack of shelters, especially in rural places when people need help. It's not where they need it. The coordination piece is an issue, and of course the funding. What more can your government do to help people?
Well, I think there's a lot of good points there. And the details, as we learn more about what happened in McCreary, is just awful. And in terms of the calls from people such as your guest and others in the community who want to see action, it's very sobering, and it really does focus on the need for us to do more. So we are investing more in supports for shelters on the operating side. We also have the resources coming both this year going into future years to stand up more 24/7 safe spaces, including in rural Manitoba. So this would be a place where somebody can go for that immediate safe space in a time of crisis. And so we're taking action there. But I think the point around moving out of silos is really key. And to that, Minister Nahanni Fontaine, who was actually speaking to frontline shelter workers yesterday, and Minister Bernadette Smith, who's in charge of housing addictions and homelessness, who was in McCreary yesterday, they are co-chairing an MMIWG2S Plus and Gender-Based Violence Committee of Cabinet. And the idea there is, instead of having this program running out of the Families Department and that program running out of the Housing Addictions and Homelessness Department and this other thing in the Justice Department, all those ministries are at the table. and they're working together to respond to this ask of how do we implement a solution that is going to ensure that somebody who needs help can get it.
You talked about more 24-hour safe spaces just now. You said especially rural Manitoba is something you're working on. Can you give us any more detail about the number or where you're looking at targeting? Or
Yeah, and just to set a realistic expectation, this is probably going to be a multi-year process in terms of identifying the local organizations to run and then like actually standing up the facilities and stuff like that. But Winnipeg is part of the list, and when we get to the part of the conversation on rural, we're looking at Brandon and Thompson as the first two outside of the city of Winnipeg. And then I think Dauphin, actually, which is not too far from McCreary, is probably the next location after that.
Before we leave this topic, I want to ask about protection orders. And we have done so many interviews over the years, and they always come as a result after someone has violated a protection order. And then we look at why they're not effective. Why don't they work? How could they work? How could they be strengthened? And this morning, my ears were ringing thinking we are still in this issue. What are your thoughts on how we make sure there are consequences for violating a protection order, or that they're more effective because we have enough enforcement, which is what advocates are telling us that's one of the problems, that there's an issue with them being enforced?
Well, I think some of the investments that we've made into the justice system around enforcement are designed to produce better standards around accountability here. And so we are making those investments in the justice system. In terms of future steps after putting additional resources, which we're doing right now, I think one of the conversations we're having in government is this topic of coercive control. And I think that based on what we've been hearing on the reporting of this instance, coercive control are those terrible actions which also unfortunately tend to predict worse situations when it comes to intimate partner violence. So this could be taking the cell phone away, or taking the debit card away, or taking other steps to try and cut a person off from economic resources, cut a person off from family. So I can tell you that our government, although we're not at a position to make a formal announcement here, we're looking closely at coercive control and how can we use the legal framework here in Manitoba to step in at that level and hopefully not only address that very challenging situation for people who are living through it, but also maybe head off some of these worse outcomes that unfortunately we've been visited with too often in Manitoba.
The details on McCreary continue to come in, including like right now. Our news department understands, and CBC has now looked at court documents that show that the charges against Marlon Glover, the man involved in this case, for violating his protection order were stayed. Is that something that you will seek to try to find out why, to dig further into this case? How concerning is that for you as Premier of this province, in a province where we have one of the highest rates of domestic violence, and we have, people are using the word epidemic?
Yeah, well, we will. When we get into the office after the interview, we'll follow up on that and see what the situation was first and foremost, and then to the point of us having the conversation here today in front of your listeners, see what we can do to address this situation. And the second point of what you say there around this being an epidemic, that is something that we have been having a conversation about with my colleagues, such as the ones that I mentioned, Ministers Smith and Fontaine, but also the Minister of Health and others in our government. And so I think also one of the things that we're doing now is asking Dr. Roussin for his professional public health opinion on this being declared an epidemic. And I think we want to take action beyond the steps that we're already taking. We're going to learn from this terrible tragedy and implement further changes. But I think putting the public health lens on this, asking Dr. Roussin for advice in terms of like, how do we respond both in the justice system and in the supports around prevention and the supports for shelters? But
and
also,
if it were labeled that way, would it change the responses or would it change things, which is very interesting?
It's an interesting thing that I think we need expertise on. But I think one of the things that we would all recognize is that and I'm using this in the layperson's meaning of the term, this seems to be contagious. Meaning this is a learned behavior. This is something that spreads through the society. And are there public health experts who can help us with how do we stop that? How do we interrupt that? How do we prevent it?
8:23, Premier Wab Kinew with us live in studio for our monthly interview as we move through the news of the day. Before I ask you about the an announcement that is coming today, I understand, on free birth control, which I will ask about in a moment, can I ask you just briefly to weigh in on something else that's in the news? We all drive, bike, walk, or roll around the city. There's a group today that's going to have a rally. They want the Idaho stop to be put into the Traffic Act. That means basically that you're going to use, cyclists will be able to use a stop sign as a yield. Do you have thoughts on that? Whether you'll look at the Traffic Act to, consider that?
Well, I want to disclose two things right off the top. Like one, I just learned about the Idaho stop. I had no idea what this was until just a short time ago. And then second of all, I ride my bike in the summertime, probably 50 to 70 kilometers a week. So I am somebody who uses a bike around the city, mainly for recreation purposes. I'm not using it to commute, so it's maybe a bit different than some of these folks who are weighing in. But those things out of the way, I have a tough time seeing how letting cyclists go through stop signs is going to advance safety in our communities. And I do worry about the impact on pedestrians, other cyclists, vehicles. I just think that we have stop signs there for a reason, and maybe it's because I'm just learning what an Idaho stop is, but I have a tough time seeing how this would help make things safer out there.
Birth control, October 1st, I believe, is the date your government's going to put through free birth control. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, later this morning, actually, I think at the top of the hour, Minister of Health, Uzoma Segura, the Minister of Families, Nathani Fontaine, as well as others from our team and the health sector, are going to announce that birth control is going to become free for everyone in Manitoba who needs it on October 1st. So again, the way that this would work, birth control will be covered by the provincial government, and you access it the same way that you would now, meaning like you go to a primary care provider, if that's your family doctor or a nurse practitioner at the access clinic or what have you. You get the script, you go to the pharmacy, it's going to be covered starting October 1st. And I think this is a big step, something that, many women across the province have been talking about, not just as an important healthcare thing, but also a bit of an affordability measure during this cost of living moment. And so this is an announcement that our team's really proud of.
8:26, for our final section of questions, I want to revisit, you already had a conversation with CBC and Bartlett Key Visible Plan 2050.
Right.
But I have additional questions about this. I mean, today on cbc.ca/Manitoba, people will read that some developers say they were quite surprised that this was going to change, that some municipalities will be able to opt out, as you said. I know during your conversation with Bartley about this, you said you were restoring democracy and choice to the people by removing a mandate to say you have to be part of this regional planning process.
Yeah.
I know you've also said this was a Pallister-Stephenson plan, but then yet you're not scrapping it all together. So I'm wondering, if you believe this should be a democratic process, why not just scrap it all together? Why are you even keeping part of it then?
Well, I think that we're making it voluntary so that if there are municipal leaders out there who want to continue to participate in it, that legwork that's already been done can continue to move forward. But for those who have objected, and you look at the city of Selkirk, who's been very vocal about this going back years now, right to the start, and maybe other municipalities south or to the west of the city that have been weighing in more recently, they're clearly saying that this is not the right fit for them as elected democratic leaders, but also not the right fit for their citizens and ratepayers. And so we want to restore that freedom. We want to restore this voluntary nature through the Freedom Bill that we're going to be bringing forward this fall. I think that the best path forward here is if folks want to advocate and push for regional planning in the Winnipeg region, then I recognize the announcement we're making is creating a bit more work for you.
Feels like a bigger mess. It feels like more red tape, more rezoning.
Actually, it's less red tape because we're removing an unelected board from being able to mandate powers onto local democratic officials. But what I'm saying is...
I take that point. I remember that criticism, but I have to say, East St. Paul and Winnipeg, I mean, you've been out to that part. They blur together so much now that, I mean, now you have, it's hard to tell where Winnipeg ends and where East St. Paul begins, just as an example. So all of a sudden, if you have a zoning industrial decision that's on one side, people that literally live right next to there now have no say. So that's not democratic either. So this is...
actually, no, you have more say under our plan. If there are merits to regional planning, then people should be able to go out and make the case and win this argument on a voluntary nature. the idea of using the heavy hand of the provincial government to quash out dissent is the thing that I think Pallister was bringing forward and continued under Heather Stephenson, and that we want to stop. At the end of the day, you have the freedom to choose where you want to live. You have the freedom to choose who you want to vote for. And this freedom bill that we're bringing in is going to restore those rights and just ensure that, yeah, there are a lot of strong arguments for a regional approach in a lot of areas, but we're going to say that making the case in public and winning support by a voluntary choice that people can make is the way that you earn support for that. We're not going to rely on the province to mandate people to participate.
On the revenue side of things, though, from the Winnipeg-only perspective, then what do you say to someone that looks at a bedroom community where half the adults or more, of those people might work in Winnipeg? They're using their roads. They use subsidized transit. Maybe they use the parks for recreation facility. They're not paying taxes here. So what do you say to that? That there's a strong case to be made that we should have just a greater Winnipeg region. We've grown to a point now where we should rethink this.
Well, that's going much further than actually any of this conversation talks about. But what I would say is that I'm the leader of the province, not just the city of Winnipeg, and I recognize that there's really strong opportunity here inside the perimeter. But when you look at the growth of Niverville and all the excitement happening there, you look at the really progressive environmental and, social and entrepreneurial steps that are happening in Selkirk, there's great things happening in the entire region. And we just want to be able to recognize that local democratic choice, the local decision-making and self-determining authority of those regions. And we're saying that the best way for us to move forward as one province is if everybody has that freedom to choose when to participate, when to go their own way. And that sort of maybe, friendly competition at some moments and cooperation at other moments kind of dynamic is how you actually spark that engine of growth that is going to take our province to the next level in the future.
I know we've crept into the news, Premier, but it's been a very busy morning. Thank you for addressing all the topics.
Thank you so much.
That is the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew. It's time now for your news.
This is CBC News. At 8:30, it's mostly cloudy and 19 degrees in Brandon, 18 degrees and rainy over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning, I'm Matt Humphrey. For the first time in Canada, freight traffic on our two largest railways has simultaneously ground to a halt. It's a new threat to our supply chain as we try to move forward from pandemic-related disruptions. Jonter Jochum farms just west of Winnipeg. He is the president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association. Jochum says the strike by CN Rail and CPKC is very concerning. After bitter negotiations, the companies locked out 9,300 engineers, conductors, and yard workers after the parties failed to agree on a new contract. Jochum says most farmers don't have room to store what they harvest. The elevators will soon be full, farmers won't get paid, and it's a catastrophe to have both railways shut down.
Not a good move at all, because with one railway, then we could limp along, but this will shut down not just agriculture, but the whole economy. Everybody will feel it.
Combined, the rail companies haul around $1 billion in goods each day. An expert in supply chain management says the federal government will likely have to step in before long to mitigate the economic impact on Manitoba and the country. In 2019, there was an 8-day strike by workers at just one rail line, CN Rail. It took months for rail transportation to get back to normal after it was over. Barry Prentice is a professor of supply chain management at the I.H. Asper School of Business. He says the government is going to have to do something within 7 to 10 days.
Hope is not a strategy, and it seemed to be like that's what the government was expressing yesterday, is that they're hoping they'll get the resolution, and it doesn't happen. So now I guess you could say the adults have to come in now and sort this out if the two parties aren't going to come to a resolution.
Prentice says the public likely won't see the impact at the grocery store just yet, but he says there will be an effect on consumer goods that are stuck at ports in containers. And as you just heard, Premier Wab Kinew says he's been in talks with Ottawa to remedy the situation quickly. Last week's triple homicide in McCreary is renewing calls for action around intimate partner violence. Mounties say the victims were the parents and brother of the suspect's former common-law partner. Court documents show the 37-year-old woman who managed to escape was granted a protection order last year, but the suspect, 41-year-old Marlon Glover, breached the conditions of that order numerous times. Statistics Canada says Manitoba has the second highest rate of intimate partner violence among the provinces. Carrie Prodzik with Parkland Crisis Centre in Dauphin says a coordinated response is needed.
We need to take action. We need to do more advocacy. We need to have more resources in areas, especially in rural communities where resources are very limited for people to access.
Prodzik says what happened in McCreary shows intimate partner violence is more prevalent than people may think. A leader with the Winnipeg synagogue says her resolve hasn't been shaken by a bomb threat yesterday. Dozens of Jewish synagogues and institutions across the country received a threatening email warning of explosives yesterday morning. In Winnipeg, Sherry Zedek Synagogue received the threat. Executive Director Rena Sector-Elbays believes the people behind the email were trying to scare them, but she doesn't want them to win.
I want our congregation to know that we're looking after them and that we're taking all the necessary measures. We don't want to stop doing what we do. The purpose of this whole thing was a campaign to create fear and disruption, so we're not going to give in to it.
After learning of the threat, the congregation quickly evacuated the Temple Shalom building they're temporarily using. They returned yesterday afternoon after getting the all clear. And as you've been hearing, some Winnipeg cyclists want the province to change traffic laws to allow them to slow roll through stop signs. It's called the Idaho Stop, named after the state, which implemented a law more than 40 years ago. The law lets cyclists slow down when approaching an intersection, but they can proceed without stopping if the coast is clear. Hillary Rosentreter says laws requiring cyclists to come to a full stop actually put them in danger.
The problem with this safety measure not being legal is that you're essentially criminalizing safety. The main reason why cyclists implement and use the Idaho Stop is to keep themselves safe, to clear the intersection, to avoid potential interactions with cars as much as possible.
A rally to support changing the law is planned for 5 today at the corner of Westminster Avenue and Walnut Street. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for the morning, Marcy.
You as well. That's Matt Humphrey in our news department. All right. The other person that's been here all morning, besides Brad Lillies, thanks, Brad, and Sierra Sanders, thanks, Sierra, is Chloe Friesen. All right. Last look at traffic weather.
Yeah, I got a few calls on the traffic line, actually. So Lori called to remind folks, Smith is closed at Ellis. That's due to folks setting up for the Bird Block Party, but it kind of sneaks up in you, and traffic is getting quite backed up in the Exchange District due to that. That's Smith at Ellis. And northbound Keewatin, just before Pritchard, there is a truck in the curb lane. Things are getting pretty backed up, says Tim, who called. So thank you for those calls. We're looking at rain for the rest of the day. We still got a chance to shower, some more thunderstorms later this afternoon here in Winnipeg.
It's not going to affect your fun tonight at the Bird Block Party.
I'll bring an umbrella.
Woohoo! Enjoy it. Chloe will be back tomorrow early too, so we'll have to make sure we've got smelling salts and caffeine. Thank you, Chloe Friesen. Thank you to our hardworking team of associate producers in our current affairs unit here at CBC Manitoba, our leaders in unit, Leif Larson, the senior producer of audio here at CBC Manitoba, and the show's producer is Nellie Gonzalez. Thank you too. Take care, be well. Thank you for listening. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is CBC, and coming up next on 89.3, The Current, and remember, more analysis through the day of that rail stoppage. We're going to hear more on Radio Noon as well, so hopefully you can tune in. Stay with us.